what's the scariest thing that happened to you when in someone else's house? Age 6 to 8ish. Slept over at a friend's house with my little brother. Her father woke us all up in the middle of the night, had us bundle up, and loaded us in the family minivan. He drove to a gas station and talked the whole way about how a bakery exploded behind their house. He said the resulting gases and such could kill us, so we had to try and drive as far away as possible. They were also our next door neighbors, so I worried about our parents' safety. At the gas station, our friend's mom bought us snacks while he canvassed the area. I told her I didn't hear any explosion and asked about my parents. She must have called them from a payphone during the snack run, because they pulled up a few minutes later to take us home. I was, of course, terrified to go home. Later on, our parents sat us down to explain that our friend's father was sick with something called schizophrenia that makes him hallucinate. Story 2. One of the most embarrassing moments of my life. Playing at a friend's house, about 8 years old. Her mom says she's going to have a bubble bath for the next hour or so. Do either of us want the bathroom before she does, as there's no other toilet in the house? We both say no. Fast forward half an hour. I start getting stomach cramps. I really need to take a crap. I try and hold it, but it's turning into an emergency situation. I tell my friend, we try and call on a neighbor. They're not in. I can't wait any longer, so I timidly knock on the bathroom door and tell my friend's mom I need to go to the toilet. She's not pleased, but tells me to come in. She doesn't get out of the bath, though. She just covers herself up and tells me to go, probably presuming I just need to wee. So I have to sit there in front of her and do this god-almighty, smelly, huge crap. It was horrible. I tried to avoid all eye contact, but I could feel the hatred seething off of her. She'd clearly been looking forward to this relaxing bath for a while, and now I was quite literally crapping all over it. I couldn't even take the time to wipe properly. I was so mortified. So I had to sit in crappy pants until my dad came to take me home. This was 20 years ago, and I still lose sleep about it. Okay, so that's humiliating, first of all, but also you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Like if you take a dump before she goes in there, it's still going to be a pretty unpleasant situation for her to walk in on. If it's really as bad as described, the bathroom is pretty much doomed no matter what. So obviously it's worse to do it while she's in the bath, but either way, I mean, you were kind of, between a rock and a hard place, so that sucks. But funny story, thanks for sharing. Story 3. My dad almost got taken out that way. It's a crazy story how he lived through that experience. My younger sister was living at home post-college. It was late in the evening and she was in her room upstairs dancing in her lingerie, as young women do. All of a sudden, she hears our mother screaming terribly. So little sister runs out of her room and down the stairs and into the guest room downstairs. What does she see? Our mother naked, screaming hysterically, and our dad effing passed out and naked on the bed. He was foaming at the mouth and making some weird sounds. So, crazy coincidence, little sister has taken a CPR course at a hospital a week earlier. She gets to work on dad while yelling at mom to call an ambulance. Paramedics show up to our mom holding a sheet to her naked body, our dad laying on a bed with a sheet modestly covering his dad-making parts, and my 20-something sister in lingerie doing CPR. Who knows what kind of F-fest they thought was going on. And I can't joke with my dad about it because I'm not supposed to know the details. He had a 99% blockage in his early 50s. Men, take your health seriously. The Widowmaker is no joke. Edit. Texted with sister who saved dad's life. Have received clarifying details. Dad was naked on the floor by the futon, foaming at the mouth and making weird sounds. Mom was in a nightdress on the floor shaking dad. Mom was screaming and crying. Sister was in lingerie from dancing alone in her room. And mom told me they were doing doggy style when he collapsed on her. Anyway, moral of this story is take care of your health, or your 20-something-year-old daughter might find you naked and have to do mouth-to-mouth to you to save your life. Eat less red meat, dudes. Edit. I'm a chick, and yes, girls like to dance in their lingerie in front of the mirror when alone. Story 4. I was probably 7. My friend lived down the street. Her mom had invited some girls to come hang out from our class, and she made us sandwiches, cookies, juice, popcorn, the normal girl day type of fun. We were in the garage playing. Her dad was either drunk or had an anger problem. He came in yelling at us, saying we were too loud. He grabbed my friend's mom by the arm and hit her. She started crying. Then he grabbed my friend and spanked her. All right. Well, he proceeded to grab each girl and spank them hard. I ran away as fast as I could back to my house. I remember my friend consistently coming to school being real tired, sometimes falling asleep at her desk. Farah, I hope you're okay. Edit. She moved away soon after, no idea where she went. I did tell my parents. After that, I remember only being allowed to go to one friend's house. Any other time, my mom would invite my friends to come to ours. Edit 2. I ran before he got to me. Still told my mom anyway. Edit 3. Yes, CPS was notified. I'm sure teachers were well aware of abuse before anyway. Story 5. Not technically in someone else's house, but I was babysitting a special needs 2-year-old, and the kid wanted to go play outside. No biggie, but since it was fall in Alaska, I wanted to make sure that it wasn't too cold out. I stepped outside to check the thermometer. The door locked behind me. I had no phone, and since it was Alaska, the closest neighbor was too far away for me to leave the kid alone in the house to get help. So I ended up ramming into the door in a panic until the lock broke and I could get in. The kid was okay, got in the laundry, but otherwise had no idea anything was wrong. I thought I would get in trouble for breaking their door, but the mother said I could have broken a window and she wouldn't have cared. The mom paid me $50 for it though, and that's a lot of money for a 12-year-old. Edit. To be clear, I didn't break the door itself, just the lock. Their lock wasn't a standard deadbolt or anything. It was a gate latch that was opened by a hidden string on the outside. The door couldn't be unlocked because the string had wrapped around the locking bolt, so it would pull tighter the more it was pulled. I opened the door by slamming against it enough that the bolt bent and I could get my fingers in there to lift it. It took a good hour or two of bashing the door. They replaced it with a deadbolt the next day. And I was the 12-year-old. The kid was 2, and the mom was in her 30s. IDK. Sorry if that wasn't clear. Story 6. My cousin brings me to his friend's house. We all hang out in the basement. My cousin forgets his cigarettes and asks if I can grab them from his car outside. I think nothing of it. Go grab the cigs and start making my way back to the house. I walk in the house by myself when I run into the friend's dad. This guy's father, who I've never met, just looks me up and down and goes, "Who the F are you? Why are you in my house?" Mind you, we're in New Jersey, and this is an Italian Guido family, so I'm basically getting yelled at by discount Tony Soprano. This guy's flipping out, and I'm scared crapless, until my cousin comes storming upstairs and clears everything up. All my cousin had to say was, "Frank, this is my cousin," and just like that, crisis averted. Love you, New Jersey. Story 7. James. Wake up, Sleeping Beauty. Time to get all your belongings mugged away. Ted. Whoa, what's going on? James. Hands up where I can see him. Ted. James, are you wearing a ski mask? James. It's a mugger hat, idiot. Now give me all your prized possessions. Ted. Damn it, James. Ski mask? What is this, a dimly lit alley in the 90s? James. This isn't James. The name's Juicy J. I was born on the streets and weaned on powdered Beatty formula, so you know I mean business. Ted. Holy crap, is that a knife in your hand? James. That's right. Give me your treasures or I'll stab you silly. Ted. That's a real knife? James. As real as the knife in my other hand. Ted. What the F? You have 2 knives? James. One to stab you silly and the other to stab you seriously. You have till the count of 3. Ted. James, this isn't funny. I'm actually feeling pretty uncomfortable here. James. 1. Ted. Stop windmilling your arms around. That's not even how you stab someone. James. 2. Ted. Seriously, stop. This isn't funny. James. 3. Ted. Dude, back off. James. It's stabbing time. Ted. All right. Jesus Christ, here's my wallet. Back the F off. James. Oh, Ted, don't you see? Ted. See what? A lunatic? James. No, don't you see that I don't want your wallet? Ted. What do you want? A broken nose? James. I want my best friend. I just want you. Ted. What? James. The treasure was never your wallet. The treasure was you the whole time. Ted. What are you talking about? James. This isn't actually robbery, Ted. Ted. Oh, wait, I get it. This is some psycho way to get me to recognize my self-worth? James. No, it's a kidnapping. Put this bag over your head and get in the trunk. Story 8. My best friend's dad was in the reserves and would come home late at night a lot. One time, he had come home and we didn't notice. We were heading to the kitchen to go make bread and cheese, and we froze in the hallway because we saw someone kneeling in front of the fireplace, which wasn't lit. We proceeded to freak the F out, which wakes up Dad, and he comes out of his room laughing his ass off. Turns out, he thought it would be funny to set his duffel bag up, wrap his coat around it, hat on top, boots in front, and it looked like some dude just chilling with his head on his knees. Old Clarky boy, I miss him. He was so much fun. Completely unrelated story with him is he bought a gold VW Golf, and when he came home with it, he burst into my friend's bedroom where we were watching Dragon Ball and yells, "I love gold!" and runs off. He was always doing crazy crap. Edit. Some people have asked for our bread and cheese recipe, so here you go. Get some uncut sub rolls, hollow them out, stuff them with sharp cheddar, and then microwave them till they're gooey and melty. I'm afraid to try it now that I'm older. IDK if it'll make me crap my pants or constipate me for a week. I definitely appreciate that recipe being provided at the end because I also wondered what bread and cheese was. Clearly, this isn't a traditional sandwich that utilized bread and cheese. No, this is just bread and cheese in all of its glory, and now we know what it is and how to make it. Not gonna make it, but yeah, thanks for sharing. Story 9. I house sat for my childhood crush when we were 12-ish as her family went on a 6-week road trip around the US. They had a cat and a bird, and you see where this is going. This stupid little finch got out of its cage. Legit, the cage was closed when I returned the next day, and the cat killed it. I was obviously scared out of my mind of being the guy who killed Crush's bird. So I did the only logical thing and went to the pet store and bought both of the finches they had that looked identical. I had about 2 weeks to figure out which was more like the cat bait, and then, not knowing what to do with the other, I kept it. They never found out, or told me if they did. And that's the story of how I ended up with a pet finch. Edit for questions. House sitting was the wrong word. I went over every day to feed their animals, bring in the mail, etc. They live pretty close to me. Y'all are some sick Fs. We were 12. My mom had finches too, hence why I was tasked to take care of this one. We just added it to the flock. The cage had slide-up doors for the food and water tray. I'm convinced that's how the bird got out. Story 10. The daycare my little sisters and I went to was down the street from our house. One day, my then 2 or 3-year-old sister told my mom her private area hurt, and that T, won't use real name, but it was the daycare lady's husband, had put something in there and that it hurt really bad. My mom obviously took her straight to the doctor, where they had come to the conclusion that she was definitely penetrated and the authorities needed to get involved immediately. Well, before the ball could get rolling on that, the daycare lady had informed us that her husband had left town and had written a note talking about how he had done horrible things that he could never take back and how they would never see him again. Upon the police arriving, they found CP, the guy was a photographer, on the guy's private computer involving several kids from the daycare. About a day or two after all this, local forest rangers reported finding a body in the woods by a camp area outside of town. They identified him as the husband with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. It gives me chills thinking about the horrible crap that was happening in that house while I was there. Edit. My little sister is doing amazing, by the way. She moved to SoCal for school and is working her way to becoming a hospitalist. She's an extremely strong person who graduated high school with a 4.4 GPA despite being homeless with my mom and bouncing around from couch to couch. She's an amazing person. Story 11. I was 11 years old and at my friend's house. His parents and all of his siblings were home. Everyone but his dad was in the front room of the house. His dad was doing yard work in the backyard. I got up to go to the bathroom and while passing the back door, saw that my friend's dad was on a ladder with an electric tree trimmer. Before I looked away and continued on, his dad fell off the top rung of the ladder and crashed hard on the ground. The tree trimmer was somehow still on and landed next to his body. The trimmer was going full horror movie and slowly moving towards him, and he was not getting up. I'm the only one who saw this happen, so I yelled, Friend's mom! Your dad fell, come quick! And ran outside to pick the trimmer up and move it away. By the time I turned it off and started focusing on him, everyone else was outside. We helped him up. The mom took him to the hospital for back pain and a mild concussion. The older siblings watched us while they were gone, and everyone was very thankful I had to pee. Edit. It was scary to me because I did not know what to do and acted on adrenaline and instinct. The fall was also pretty intense looking. I thought I saw a guy die. Story 12. This happened when I was like 8. I went over to this girl's house, really liked her. Her older brother told us about Bloody Mary, and she was ecstatic to try and summon her. So she asked me to come with her, and of course I said yeah. So we go in there, turn off the lights, shut the door, she starts chanting it, and the brother starts pounding on the door, screaming. When we tried to open the door, it was locked, and he kept pounding and screaming, "Oh God, she's got a knife! Help!" After like a while, he finally let us out, laughing his ass off. Mirrors effing scared the crap out of me until I was 16, and I'm still wary of them to this day. Edit. He didn't lock it. He was leaning against the door or put something against it. I used the word lock to describe that it wouldn't open. Sorry about the confusion. Story 13. This was when I was really young, like 7 or 8. And it's one of those memories where I'm not sure if it was real or just a crazy dream, and it was too long ago to tell, but I'll tell it anyways. Was with a childhood friend at his house in the boonies. He lived in a real rundown house, but his neighbor down the road was pretty affluent, with a great house. He said he wanted to go exploring, and being a kid from the desert, I was down for that. He led us to the house, where he somehow convinced us to climb through the guy's doggy door into the house. Pretty great house. I still remember the layout vividly. Anyways, here we were, exploring some random guy's house, when we hear a door open. My friend had thought the owner wasn't home because the neighbor's cat wasn't in the driveway, so he thought we were safe. We sprinted and hid behind separate leather couches in the guy's living room. He came out of the kitchen wearing a bathrobe and nothing else, and got a glass of water, reading a magazine. We watched him from behind the couches as he took his time and finally went back up the stairs. We sprinted out of that house and back to my friend's house, and I don't think Usain Bolt himself could have beaten my 7-year-old sprint. It was pretty scary then, but it's absolutely terrifying to think what could have happened. TLDR, snuck into a random guy's house with a friend as a kid, almost got caught. Will never break and enter again. Story 14. It was a shared house that our ski club owned, up in Vermont. We were renting it for the night, along with a few other families. All was fine until after dinner, when I had to take a particularly bad dump. Naturally, the toilet clogged. I tried plunging, I tried flushing again, I tried other disgusting methods, but it would not go down. Knock knock. A sinking feeling entered my stomach as I realized someone was at the door. This was the only restroom, and the contents of the toilet bowl were swimming around in a brown soup of disgustingness. I couldn't flush again or it would overflow, and nothing was working. So I washed my hands and explained the situation to the waiting gentleman, who was a portly dude in a wife beater and worn jeans. He told me to get out of the way, which I did with haste. I don't know how he got it to go down, but he did. I apologized like 20 times. It was a terrible, smelly, revolting situation. At least I had enough toilet paper, huh? Story 15. The first time meeting my boyfriend's family, who lives in another country, we stayed in his old attic bedroom. In the middle of the night, he reaches over and shakes me awake. Huh? I mumble, and he says, "Shh, be very still. I think there's someone else in the house." I lay motionless, thinking that someone has broken in and I'm about to be psycho-murdered, listening to the sounds of the old creaky attic, convinced every gust of wind is a footstep. He puts his arm around my head, covering my ears. I don't move for hours in fear, until I hear him snoring. And that was the night I discovered, for the first time, he talks in his sleep. Edit. Thanks for the silver. To celebrate, I'll share one of the many other stories of his sleep talking. We were in bed discussing things we need to pick up at the store. I was making a mental note. So, eggs, milk, bread. I think that's all. Anything else? He goes, "Oh, can you add rope to the list?" I go, "Yeah, sure." A few seconds pass. Wait, what do we need rope for? "For the net," he says. "Cool. What net?" "You know, the net for the trap." "What trap?" "The trap for Vince Vaughn. We have to stop him. Stop him before he kills us." Story 16. When I was about 16, I had spent the night at my best friend's house. During this time, there were rumors going around that I was gay because I came out to a previous friend who decided to share it with others. My best friend knew of my sexuality, but it did not bother him at all. During the sleepover, I remember laying on the floor while he was in his bed. I was still laying opposite to his head, which angled me towards the opening of his bedroom door. In the middle of the night, I get this jolt of adrenaline in the middle of the night as I had the feeling that someone was watching me. I still had the cover over me and made a hole shape to peek out of. The door was cracked open. It was completely shut before we both knocked out. I stared deeper into the crack and noticed what looked like another pair of eyes staring back. I get this horrible pit in my stomach as the eyes continue to look around the room, right up to the point when it locked onto my eyes. The door began to crack open wider. I see a full head peek its head in at an attempt to get a closer look of something, when all of a sudden this thing bursts the door open shouting, "I caught you!" while removing the covers off my friend. My friend immediately shouts, "What the F?" and flicks on the light switch. It was his mother. She stormed out of the room and slammed the door to her room. Me and my buddy had a hard time falling back to sleep as we were trying to figure out what that was all about. The next morning, I overhear my friend talking to his mom while I was in the bathroom. Apparently, she heard I was gay and that she always had a feeling. She was trying to catch if I was doing stuff to him in his sleep. Effing ridiculous was my reaction, but I washed up and told my buddy that I would be going home. Her head popping in with some scary crap. Never told him why. We're still best friends. I just avoid his mother. Story 17. I was at this stranger's house to give him some money for accidentally hitting him on his bike. I was also on a bike. And the first thing I notice is that his house is really dark. Not in that his lights weren't on. His house didn't have lights at all. No ceiling lights or lamps or anything. Homeboy legit used a flashlight around his own house to get around and find things. Next thing I know, this guy who I've spoken maybe 100 words or less to is showing me a straight up two-handed sword and matching dagger that are both razor sharp. This is one of those people who have a harder time being quiet than thinking of things to say. And next thing you know, I've been into every room in his place and met his pet parrot the size of an effing eagle. The reason I was there in the first place was to replace a handmade Italian seat for his bike, and he ended up giving me a pair of $30 gloves, the old gloves that got a few scratches on them when I hit him, 5 to 10 high-end protein/power bars, and a glass of strawberry lemonade. Definitely a strange experience. Story 18. My brother and sister adopted from my uncle and his girlfriend at the time. They were, and still are as far as I know, junkies who cared more about the drugs than they cared about their children. When I was young, my parents were still trying to help them get their crap together so they could reclaim their children into a loving and stable home. It never happened. Instead, what happened was yelling and screaming matches at my uncle's trailer home, who was with another woman by then, or his ex-girlfriend's apartment. Neither one wanted to stop the drugs. I remember being scared and upset at hearing my mom being so upset that she was yelling and screaming at these people. I honestly thought that someone was going to be hurt or worse. Eventually, my parents realized they'd never give up the drugs and they just adopted the kids outright, and I consider them my siblings. It's not all roses. My brother is in prison, but my sister is happy living with her husband and little daughter, who's just the cutest toddler in the world. Story 19. When my SO and I first started seeing each other, I had just recently switched to a non-hormonal BC after having the next planet implant and no periods for 2 years. The second time I went over to his house, I unexpectedly got my period, and I had been warned by my doctor my periods might be a little heavier than before. Little did I know, this was a huge understatement. So I'm cuddling with my SO when I realize I'm feeling a little moist, and not the good kind. So I excuse myself to go to the bathroom. I'm not joking when I say I had a steady stream of menstrual blood coming out of me, and my pants, thankfully solid black, were soaked too. I wasn't expecting my period, so I had no pads or tampons, and my SO lived with 4 other guys who were single, so no feminine products were lying around. The cherry on top, though, was the fact that they were completely out of toilet paper, and I had left my phone in the bedroom, so I was basically stranded on the toilet. Once I realized how effed I was, I had a panic attack and cried. After what felt like forever, my SO knocked and asked if I was okay, and I told him what was going on. He was really understanding and ran down to the store to get me tampons, TP, and pants. I was so embarrassed at the time and scared he would judge, but it's really funny to look back on. Story 20. It was one of my first sleepovers. I was at my cousin's house and I didn't know his house very well. I woke up to use the bathroom, but I wasn't quite sure where it was. All the lights were off and everyone was asleep. It was complete black. I felt my way into the hall and walked to where I thought the bathroom was and only found the stairs. I tried to go back to the room, but I couldn't find it. I didn't want to make any noise as my uncle was working day turn and he needed to sleep. He was working swing shifts all the time at the mill and was really cranky if you woke him. I blundered around upstairs trying to find the door to the room that I was sleeping in, but couldn't find it. I started to panic. Eventually, I had to call out for help as I couldn't even find a light switch. My aunt woke up and drove me back over to my grandma's house as I was in a complete panic. I must have been about 7 or 8. It doesn't sound like much, but it was a big deal to me at the time. Story 21. When I was in high school, I was house sitting for the first time at my best friend's place. He had 2 dogs. It was a split-level home, so I was in the downstairs with surround sound watching Event Horizon for the very first time. At some point mid-movie, all of the power in the house goes off, and I'm in pitch blackness and confusion for about 5 seconds until the power comes back on and the doorbell rings. The dog starts going nuts and barking at the door. I'm at this point freaking out. I run straight upstairs to my friend's room and grab the BB gun I know is next to his dresser. I start inching back downstairs towards the door with the squirrel popper tightly in hand. I turn on the porch light, but no one is out there. The dogs are still riled up though. At this point, I can see outside that it's raining. I hadn't heard the storm before because of the loud movie, followed by my pounding heart. I call my mom and ask her casually if the power went out at our house due to the storm. We lived about 5 minutes from my friend. She said, "No, but a funny thing happened." The phone line suddenly went dead. Now I'm starting to freak out a little bit because the power is still on, but the phone is dead. This is when cell phones were just starting to become normalized, but most people still used pagers. After about a minute or so, I'm trying to rationalize everything when the power goes back out. About 5 seconds pass, the power comes back on, and doorbell rings. The dog starts going nuts again. I had left the porch light on, but didn't see anyone out there. So I herded the dogs back downstairs, locked the door, clutched the BB gun to my chest, and finished watching Event Horizon. TLDR, watched Event Horizon while house sitting. Freaky stuff happened with power outages. I grabbed a BB gun and finished the movie like a man. Movie still freaks me out. Story 22. I need to talk about this story, so I changed to my throwaway account. I'm in my 20s, and I had to stay at a colleague's house when I'm visiting her town for business. Because the company made me stay at her house, they got her a brand new mattress for me to sleep in. I had a terribly stressful day that day, and we had some alcohol before we went to bed. That night, I didn't have a good sleep. It was nightmare after nightmare, and I just dreamt that I was in the bathroom. Then I wet the new mattress. I immediately woke up to find that I'd wet the new mattress, and I went into panic. I tried to dry the mattress with my towels. Luckily, I brought more than one towel, and went to Google on what to do. The next day was the day I had to travel home, but before I left and while she was at work, I washed the mattress. I told my colleague that I had my period and stained the mattress. That's why the mattress was washed and hanging on the balcony. She bought that story. Phew. That is literally the scariest thing I've ever done at someone's house. Okay, so washing a mattress, I suppose I understand, like with soap and water, maybe some detergent, disinfectant. But the part at the end about the mattress hanging on the balcony, how in the world do you pull that off? Just kind of an insane visual of this massively heavy mattress just, casually hanging off the side of a balcony. I mean, clearly English is not this poster's first language, so I'm sure that this isn't exactly the way it went down, but anyway, I just thought that was funny. Moving on. Story 23. When I was little, I would have a good amount of sleepovers at my friend's house. My fam always had tons of allergies to pets, so we never had any. My best friend had dogs and a really wonderful special cat, but I didn't know anything about cats when I was little, so I'd kind of say hi, then run away. It's the summer, and my friend has a tent and wants to sleep in the tent in his backyard. I'm not crazy about it, but we bring a bunch of blankets out and get all set up. When I wake up, it's lights out, so maybe 7 to 8 in the morning, and his cat is laying on my chest with her paws right under my chin and her nose like right near my nose. I'm laying there in mortal fear because I figure she's planning on eating my face off. She's purring, so that must have been a sign she was going to strike. I remember sort of half moving to get her to go away, but she'd just sit there and kind of flex her paws a little. I think I lay frozen for like a good hour until she decided to do something else and got off of me. I barely escaped death. As I grew up, she became a great friend. Whenever I'd go over, she'd come find me and sit either on me or next to me. Because of her, I love cats now and respect them. She was special. Story 24. When I was in high school, one of my friends was having a birthday party at their house. Now, I'm kind of introverted, so at some point, they were all in the kitchen doing something, and I was in the living room sitting on the porch just taking a short mental break. A little before this, one of the party guests, Jay, had their boyfriend, B, show up. He announced he was high, not sure on what, and a little after, he passed out asleep on the other couch in the living room. While I'm taking my break, I look over at B and I notice something off. He's twitching a lot now, and it's turning into full-on convulsions with each passing second. I call Jay into the room once I notice he's now foaming a little at the mouth. They all come into the living room and crowd around B. Someone's dialing 911. I'm still on the other couch like a dumb F because I don't know what else to do. Jay tries to wake B up, shaking him. Suddenly, he bolts up, screams, and stagger runs out the front door. At this point, my aunt shows up to pick me up, and I skedaddle out of there. As far as I know, the guy was fine, just having a bad reaction to whatever he took. I made new friends after this. TLDR, at a party when a guy has a bad reaction to the drugs he took. He has convulsions and runs out into the neighborhood screaming. I leave. Story 25. So generally I'm afraid of big dogs. I went over to my new friend's house to get ready to go out clubbing. Coming in, she introduces me to her stepdad's 3 Dobermans to help me get comfortable. All 3 are cute dogs, very friendly and wanting pets. I give each one a treat and we're all friends, right? So I'm feeling at ease. I don't think anything of it. We decide to ride together, so I go to step outside and move my car while she does her makeup. As I head for the back door, I came in the front, dog number 1 cuts me off and stands in front of the door. I reach for the knob and they're snarling. Okay. I turn to head upstairs and the other 2 have me in a triangle. Not growling, just staring. I'm in a triangle of Doberman. I try to stay calm and take another step. The 2 in front step towards me, growling. I start to call up to my friend. Bad idea. I get 1 syllable of her name out and now teeth are being bared. I'm now terrified. For context, I'm 5 feet tall and female. I try to reach for my phone. The triangle shrinks a lot and growling intensifies. I realize this is how I'm going to die. They're snarling, shiny white teeth bared, heckles up, closing in, and my friend appears, panicked, calling the dogs by name. They back off. She hugs me, then opens the door. All 3 of those jerks wag their tails like everything is cool. Everything was not cool. It turns out they're rescues, and some idiot taught them to keep people in the house until there's a hug. A literal hug. She was very apologetic about her brain fart. It's been years, and we're super tight now, but the dogs are still not quite trained out of it. Most places don't deliver there anymore. I don't visit anymore either. She moved years ago. Story 26. I've told this story before on other threads, but when I was about 17, I was at my friend's apartment building, which his parents owned. It was a pretty old building in the Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago, and according to his dad, it used to be owned by Al Capone, but I'm not sure how true that was. We had an apartment on the top floor that they let us use to just hang out, and it allowed us easy access to the roof so we could go smoke cigarettes. One night, we were about to go up, but I had to pee, so I told him I'd meet him up there. After I was done, I went up the stairs to the attic portion that was connected to the roof. There were no lights, so we always used our phones to guide us. We had those old flip phones without lights, so you only had the light from the screen to help navigate the cluttered mess that was up there. As I made my way to the roof door, I saw a shadow pass by me. Now, this wasn't like the shadow of something moving with the light of my phone. This shadow felt solid, like a person. I followed the direction it went, thinking it was my friend. I kept saying that I knew it was him and to stop playing around. It passed me a few more times before heading to the other side of the attic, and that's when I heard my friend's voice from downstairs. He got a call from his girlfriend and was in another room talking to her the whole time. I have no idea what that shadow figure was, but it really freaked me out, and I told my friend what happened and that I did not want to go back up there. Story 27. I was sleeping over at a friend's house in a big old colonial in Germantown, an old neighborhood in Philadelphia. It was early February, so it was pretty cold, and my friend had brought me a ton of blankets to sleep under. The room was fairly narrow, with a twin bed set up across a window and a floor-length dressing mirror in front of the closet. I was uneasy going to sleep because I'd never been there before, but eventually I did fall asleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I felt like I woke up to see a woman all dressed in white standing in front of the mirror by the closet. She was facing the bed, but her long dark hair was loose and streaming in front of her face so that I couldn't see what she looked like. I lay there for what seemed like hours, just staring at her, standing motionless across the room. I was too afraid to move, in case she was waiting for me to wake up before she did anything. Though I never saw her do it, she moved across the room till she was sitting on my chest, with her arms across my throat and her hair trailing over my face. I was struggling to breathe, really gasping huge, heaving breaths, but all I ended up doing was sucking in huge mouthfuls of her hair, making it even harder to breathe. I was choking to death on her hair, and I couldn't move enough to dislodge her from my chest. And then I woke up. The weight was all those blankets my friend brought me to sleep under in her drafty old house, and the hair was my own, uncharacteristically left loose as I slept. It took me ages to get back to sleep, but once I woke up, I didn't remember the whole thing till months later. Story 28. I wasn't in the house, but just outside it. I went to visit my paternal grandmother at her house. She kept the door locked, so she had to come over to unlock it when I arrived. Her living room has large windows that overlook the street, and you can even see the door from there, so I could easily see her and she could see me. My grandmother was frail and suffered from arthritis, and in fact, she passed not long after this. As she was walking to the door, she fell down in the living room. I had no key to the house, and I was freaking out. I had no idea what to do. I was ready to freaking break the living room window in or call 911. Then she somehow managed to climb back up using furniture to prop herself back to a standing position and open the door. After that day, I demanded a key to the house from my parents. I hate to think what would have happened if she didn't miraculously get back up. I felt so helpless. Nearly as hopeless as the time my maternal grandfather fell crossing a busy street and traffic was starting to back up down the street. At least that time, I was able to prop my grandfather up and carry him over to the side of the road before the cars reached us. Moral of the story? Watch for your elders falling. Story 29. This is so embarrassing. I was in elementary school having a sleepover with a friend. We were in her basement when we noticed the little beans were coming out of the bean bags they had down there. And the beans were moving around because static electricity, I guess. But we were convinced the bean bags were haunted. By ghosts, who wanted to move beanbag filler around on pleather, as ghosts often do. We ran upstairs screaming to our babysitter, who was watching sports. Well, my friend was screaming. I was laughing hysterically. That's how I found out when I'm really scared. I laugh. Naturally, our babysitter, the older brother of a friend, thought we were just effing with him since I was collapsing with laughter and babbling about haunted beanbags. He basically told us to shut the F up and let him watch his sports. I guess this shows that I had a pretty sheltered childhood. Story 30. This happened sometime in the mid-2000s. I'm over at a friend's house late at night, and the two of us are watching reruns of the classic Twilight Zone. His family is out somewhere, so it's just us in this large 2-story house. The episode we were watching had to do with this town that gets enveloped in never-ending darkness, and the people in the town all hate each other, so the darkness was supposed to be a manifestation of their anger or something like that. Anyways, the episode nears the end, and Rod Sterling begins his ending narration. He says something to the effect of, "And be sure not to let the darkness consume you," or something similar. My memory is vague. And I crap you not, as soon as Rod said those words, the power in the house went out, and me and my friend were left in shock, sitting in the living room in total darkness. It was the freakiest coincidence I've ever experienced in my life. And no, it wasn't a prank because nobody else was home, and my friend never left the living room. This is not the first story that I've heard of something weird happening during or right at the conclusion of an episode of the classic Twilight Zone. It's almost like the show itself is opening up a direct portal into the Twilight Zone. Moving on. Story 31. I spent the night at one of my best friend's house in elementary school. It was a super chill night. Jumped on his trampoline, played some basketball and some Xbox. Hell, even watched Two Girls, One Cup, which was a big wake-up call for me and what originally made me think that the internet was bad and YouTube was something I should stay away from. This was the early days of YouTube and I was young. But anyways, as we were hanging out, and it gets to be about 8 p.m., and a friend of ours has her mom drive her over to this house to look at my friend's hamster, which he was trying to sell. Well, that put his mom over the edge when she showed up. She was very drunk and started screaming at my friend right into his face. Some of the meanest crap I've ever heard. He just took it with a stone-cold face as I started bawling, not knowing what to do. We would leave the room and then she would follow us, and eventually it escalated to her just hitting my friend in the face multiple times. I escaped myself since her targets were on him and sat in his little sister's room as we both cried together, and I remember just asking God why someone so dear to me had to live like this. Because based off his reactions, I could tell this was a regular thing. Finally, when it started to get really bad, his father came home and instantly loaded me and my friend up in the car, and he dropped me back off at my house. I stayed up that whole night talking with my mom, crying my eyes out at what I had witnessed. It was a big wake-up call for me to see the way that some people are raised and gave me an appreciation for my parents and how calm they always were with me, because I was definitely a little crap. I still think of that situation and get heated. Since then, I see that friend here and there, and it seems like things are going pretty good for him, which always makes me happy to see. We've graduated high school, and I think he's in college right now. Anyways, sorry for the long story. Just had to get that all into words. I've never felt so helpless and so worried for someone I cared about. ever. Story 32. I was at this girl's house and her mom's boyfriend came home drunk. He started getting angry about something and took an axe into the house, swung it into the fridge, and screamed, "Do you want this to end up like the Villisca axe murders?" I live in Iowa. For those who don't know the story, serial killer snuck into a house of a family with kids and their friends staying over and murdered them all with an axe. Was never caught. I lie in bed, clutching my friend, who was silently sobbing, praying to God he didn't come upstairs, because her door lock didn't work. He started going off the rails and screaming at me to go the F home now while the mother was telling him to leave me alone. Scary crap. I think he just left the house after that. It was a long time ago, and I only now remembered it after reading some of the other comments. I could have been murdered that night by a drunk a-hole. Story 15. I was at my friend's house when we were 7. We'd often just hang out and play Donkey Kong and Mario Kart on N64. She had a brother, a few years older, who'd stick around at times. He once grabbed some big chicken knives and threatened us. He was a few feet away, so not threatening us with a knife to the neck type of thing. Still, we were 7. We obviously freaked out. He said he'd stab us, kill us, cut us up, etc. He kept this up for about 10 minutes and then burst out laughing, saying it was a prank. Real effing funny, man. Their family eventually moved away and we didn't keep in touch. I wonder if my friend's brother has turned into a psychopath. Story 34. Alright, story time. Back in 2008, I was in Germany as an exchange student. One day, me and my host family went to a family friend's house for lunch. After lunch, we were playing board games, and I needed to take a piss. To be polite, I asked, "Can I use your bathroom?" And the host pointed me to the door behind the dining table. I walked into the bathroom, and there was a sink, a bath, and something that looked like a toilet with no lid or seat, and really low to the floor. I looked around confused for a few minutes before thinking, F it, this must be some weird German loo, and started to take a piss into the low bowl. Immediately, the host calls out, "Ah, if you're looking for the toilet, it's next door." I panic, cut myself off midstream, and get super embarrassed thinking, what the F have I just pissed into? Their foot spa or something? I walk out of the bathroom, apologize and say, sorry, I was quite confused, and go next door to the separate toilet room with a toilet of normal height and with a seat and lid. Walk back out very embarrassed, wondering if the host heard me piss in the bathroom and hoping I haven't pissed in something I shouldn't have. I whispered to my host brother when I was back at the table, asking him what the hell was that thing in the bathroom I pissed in. He said it was a bidet, thank goodness, so it's had a lot worse in it than piss. Weird that it's in a different room though. Do people have to crab scuttle from the toilet to the bathroom? Story 35. Well, I'm not sure if it counts, but I was right outside of his house, like right in front. 2 steps and I was on his house. 4th grade, and I had this friend on the corner of my street. He used to go to my school. He was my best friend. We talked every time at school. He never mentioned his parents, but this one time I asked him if he wanted to play at his house or something, just to hang out. So I came over, and his dad came out with a bat, telling me to F off or he'd come and beat me. Keep in mind, I didn't say a single thing. I was just like, WTF? I asked if my friend, let's call him Dave, could come down. He just closed the door on me. My dumbass knocked again because Dave said he would be 100% okay to hang out. Dad just comes out ready to effing hit me, and I was really scared. I just backed off and ran. Only told my mom, but she didn't take it that serious. I didn't know why he reacted like this. Apparently, 2 to 3 months later, a bunch of cops came to my friend's house one day and they arrested his dad and mom because they'd been secretly dealing cocaine and weed at their house. I guess he acted like this because he didn't want anybody to know that they were selling drugs. Thank God I didn't come back again, or something bad could have happened to me. Story 36. First, when I was a kid, I had a neighbor named Z who was also my best friend. I'd spend the night at his house often and saw a lot of things young me didn't realize at the time was very messed up. His parents were drunks and smoked pot. Both were pretty functional. Mom cooked and cleaned, father worked, but it was very clear the couple valued their smoke and drink over their son. Z had an uncle, mom's side, who showed up one day fresh out of prison and started staying with them. Uncle was a nasty drunk, often got violent with Z's dad and acted like he was the head of the household. One time while staying over, Z and I fell asleep on the sofas watching TV. Uncle came in and, unbeknownst to sleeping me, woke Z up and became confrontational. I should mention, Z and I are about 8 at the time. I was startled awake by yelling and opened my eyes to Uncle shoving, choking, and lifting Z up by the neck and slamming him onto the wood floor so hard I felt it from the couch. Z's mom and dad had rushed out to help him, and his mom called the police, and Uncle was taken away. I still relived the sound and feel of Z's body hitting the wood floor. It was just awful. Second, in high school, I made a seemingly normal friend named Jay. She was a little edgy, but who wasn't as a teenager? So I didn't find anything off about her at face value. We hung out at school for a while, then she asked me over for a weekend sleepover. I said sure, why not, and happily went. It is still one of my biggest regrets to date. Jay, for lack of a better word, was and likely still is a psycho. She showed me what she likes to do for fun. Trade pictures of random naked women with random guys in chat rooms like trading cards or some crap. Also, she broke into her mom's liquor cabinet to drink wine. When her mom got home and saw what she'd done, Jay threw a giant glass vase into her closet, so it shattered, and then proceeded to walk inside and injured herself on the shards while I sat on the edge of her bed, freaked out, but also too scared to say a word because she wasn't upset or crying. She was furious and didn't say a single word the entire time while she injured her arms with shards of glass. Thankfully, her mom said she was sending me home as a punishment. I've never been so happy to get out of a situation in my life. Story 37. When I was 12, around 2006, I'd often stay the weekend at my friend's house in a really rural area. I'm talking in the mountains, with houses separated by a half-mile of road and woods and maybe one streetlight every mile. Very dark and creepy at night. His dad, Marine veteran, liked to hunt real in a woods type of guy, had a school bus set up deep in the woods. Every seat had been taken out except for the driver's and the front four. Behind those was 2 couches, a toilet, a TV, a water bank, a bed, a bookshelf, and a suitcase full of MREs. He'd often go on weekend-long camping trips in this bad boy. As a kid, this was an absolute prime hangout location. We'd spent months exploring the woods. However, this particular time of year, there were a lot of mountain lions in the area, and we'd been warned against going too far in the woods. Well, that night, my friend had several people over, including myself, and a few kids that lived nearby that were both older than us by a few years. We had all kinds of snacks, our Game Boy SPs with Pokemon, our Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and one of those old, bulky, portable DVD players. Really set up for a night of debauchery. Well, around 10 p.m., we start to notice some strange occurrences. We'd occasionally hear some twigs snapping nearby. At first, one of the older kids noticed and was very freaked out by it, but the rest of us just played it off as some small critters running about. Then, the twig snaps started getting closer. One by one, each of us began to get more and more scared. Talk started of what we'd do if a mountain lion roamed up to the bus. We all had a walkie-talkie to communicate back to the parents, and it would take a solid 10 to 15 minutes to make it to or from the house. After a while, the twigs stopped snapping and the tension slowly subsided. We went back to battling our Pokemon teams while eating Lay's and having a jolly time laughing and cutting up. All memory of our previous fears had been forgotten, at which point the bus starts shaking. At first, it was barely noticeable. The most paranoid of us were the first to point it out, and quickly we all fell into the same paranoia. Every couple minutes, the bus would shake slightly. We opened a window slightly. No wind. Closed the window again. We shined our flashlights out, but could see nothing. We began to discuss our fate. Then the shaking started to get much more noticeable and could no longer be written off as all in our heads. At this point, there was no discussion, except small utterances of abject horror and stifled whimpering. The shaking stopped. Quick glances to each other to confirm we'd all noticed. Suddenly, slow scraping along the back of the bus. There was no holding back and trying to act tough in front of each other. We all started screaming. The largest and oldest of us hid himself under a blanket, likely crying and saying his final prayers. Shortly after, we hear a low, deep growl at the end of the bus. At this point, we're all in hysterics, absolutely losing our mind in fear. We radio our friend's dad. His mom answers, and we're collectively losing our crap, screaming at her to get his dad and grab a gun and come save us. She begins freaking out, saying she's in the shower and that she'll get him out and he'll be there in 10 minutes. The shaking and noises stop. Only for a few minutes. However, this time we stay on edge. One of us suggests opening a window to see if the coast is clear. The bravest of us reluctantly opens the window, and immediately a huge mass slams against the window. We all begin shrieking in terror. The door to the bus starts violently shaking. We're all in tears and scream into the radio for his dad to hurry because we're about to be attacked. No response. The bus doors fling open. We all scream, jump, and scramble. hurdling objects to get to the back of the bus. And then laughter, hysterical laughter. We all look back to the front of the bus, shaking from pure adrenaline, to see our friend's dad doubled over in tears from laughing so hard. He laughed for a solid minute before standing up. Man, I got y'all good, bastard. So, very predictable outcome, but also very well told from the perspective of a child. I'm sure that legitimately was horrifying, because kids, coupled with the cover of darkness, imagination's probably just running absolutely wild there. So yeah, good story. Story 38. I was into the weird guy in my high school and ended up going over to his parents' house one day to hang out. He has weird pin face masks, and his parents have a seance looking room in their bedroom with the symbols drawn on the floor and candles in the books. Cool, 15-year-old me is into it. Dinner time rolls around and he tells me to stay upstairs and very forcefully tells me not to come down no matter what while he goes down for dinner. Weird, but whatever. Teenage me is happy to not have to make small talk with parents over dinner. About 10 minutes after he heads down, the father starts yelling, "Hey, girl, come down here," over and over. I don't. Eventually, he comes back upstairs like nothing happened. I'm asking WTF the dad was yelling, and he just laughs and changes the topic. Noped out of there pretty quick when the mom started digging a huge hole in front of the yard after the sun went down. They lived in a super secluded mountain area of the town we lived in where the forest was so dense you could not hear your neighbors having a party. Do not want to know what the F. Was probably nothing, but still super weird to a 15-year-old me. Story 39. I was over at my neighbor's house when I was 12 or so. She was the same age. Anyway, she wasn't supposed to have visitors over when her grandparents, who she lived with, weren't home. Well, they came home earlier than expected and we panicked. There was only one way in and out of the house, so instead of trying to get out, I hid under the covers in one of the rooms. Grandma and Grandpa come inside and we were immediately busted. They had seen my sandals by the front door, so they knew someone was still in the house. Thing is, they thought it was a guy, and I proceeded to lay as still as I could under the covers while my friend got yelled at. At one point, the grandma came into the room I was in and checked the closet. She never checked the bed because it was full of stuffed toys that hid the lump that was actually me. She then turned off the lights. I was still terrified of the dark at the time. I stayed there for about 20 more minutes listening to my friend get grounded and everything before I figured I could sneak out now. But their dogs gave me away. LMAO, the grandparents started laughing once everything got straightened out and made clear we weren't in any trouble. In hindsight, I don't even know why we both got so scared. It's funny now. Story 40. I was at my ex-boyfriend's house. It was common for us to lay in his bed, cuddled up watching TV, movies, and playing video games. He was 18 and I was 18. We'd been together for 2 years at this point. We were supposed to be the only ones there. We were being intimate and his dad comes in. Caught us in the act. I got thrown off by his dad next to my ex-boyfriend in his bed, and his father started laying into him while I was laying in bed. He almost punched me as well. I got out and grabbed my clothes and car keys. I was putting on my pants as I ran down the hallway, trying to get out. I even left my underwear behind. As I was going out the door, my boyfriend was hot on my heels. He grabbed his dad's wallet on the table and he left with me. He wanted to go get a hotel, but I knew better. It happened to be 4th of July weekend and we went and watched some fireworks. Then I went home and brought my boyfriend. My parents offered for him to live there if he got a job. He didn't want to, but spent the night on our couch. He went home the next day. Honestly, it was a crappy relationship, as I've mentioned before on Reddit, and he was a crap boyfriend in person overall. But he was my first boyfriend, my first everything, so I stayed in that relationship longer than I should have. His parents always seemed nice and pretty cool. I thought I knew him well over those 2 years. I knew there was problems in that family, as they favored their oldest, and always bought her stuff and never him. But then his mom babied him to the point he had no idea how to cook or do anything basic like laundry or cleaning. It was shocking and disturbing. I never went back to his house if there wasn't a bunch of other people there, and I never would be around his dad anymore. Story 41. Dog/house sitting at a friend's place. Went to bed about 11 to 12. Put dogs in their kennels as they tend to bark at things they see at night out the windows and part of their evening routine. I fall asleep, but at 3 or 4 a.m., I wake up to dogs barking their heads off, flipping out. Kennels were in the tri-level basement, and I was upstairs, so it was muffled but loud. I'm like, oh F, someone's in the house. I grab my pistol and start creeping through the house, listening for any additional noises, but don't hear anything, and the dog barks don't sound right for the dogs I'm sitting, but still, like, WTF. I finally get all the way through the house and go downstairs to see the dogs try to figure out what the F is going on. They're fast asleep and only lift their heads when they hear me move towards them, like, "Oh, hey, it's you. Is it time for breakfast?" With a head-tilting, quizzical look. At this point, I'm like, am I dreaming? I go and look outside and notice the next-door neighbors have conveniently returned from a parent vacation with their boat and dogs and just let them loose in the backyard barking their heads off. I was pissed, but more relieved and exhausted, and went back to bed till 8. Story 42. When I was a little girl of about 7, my mom decided to leave me and my little sister, 4, with her cousin, let's call her Sarah, and Sarah's husband, Dan, and 2 small kids, for a couple of weeks during the summer. Well, Dan was a complete psychopath ex-cop who essayed the little girl at night. I was in the same bed but didn't fully realize what was happening until I was older. One day, this couple left me with their infant son while they went to the store. I tried to pick him up, but I was a frail, skinny kid and dropped the large infant, I'm guessing 9 months old, which left a small bruise on his forehead. Since Dan was clearly an abusive nut, always calling Sarah names, controlling everyone, and just generally scary, upon seeing the bruise, Sarah became physical, blamed Dan, and they got in a huge fight. I heard them screaming and slamming things in their bedroom and looked through a crack in the door to see Dan, bizarrely, squeezing her head between his legs hard as she screamed. As soon as Dan saw me watching, he got angrier and pulled a gun on her, then pointed it at me, all the while screaming at everyone. Thinking fast, I grabbed my sister's hand and went under the apartment back porch area, ran to a payphone and called my mom. She came and got us and called the cops. I never found out what happened, but we never saw that family again. TLDR. Stayed with my mom's cousin's family for 2 weeks one summer as a kid. Husband was an absolute maniac ex-cop who pulled a gun on everyone during an argument with his wife. Story 43. Jonathan, Andy, and I took turns sleeping at each other's houses over the summer between 4th and 5th grade. None of our parents had money, so eating at home over 3-day shifts worked out well for our parents' budgets, and no one ever bothered to complain. It became so regular that sometimes our parents didn't know whose house we were at. The 3-day rotation was perfect. They never saw us long enough to get irritated and saw us enough not to get worried. Most of the time when we stayed at Andy's, we never saw his dad. That was mostly because he worked nights and we made sure to leave in the morning if we crashed there. Now, Andy's dad was already a terrifying dude. Half of his face was scarred from 3rd-degree burns and he was drunk most of the time. One night we were crashed in Andy's bedroom and we wake up to Andy's mom screaming. The bedroom light flicks on and he's standing there with a belt in his hand. He reaches to the bottom bunk and grabs Andy by the hair and drags him into the living room. Jonathan and I don't know what to do, so we creep into the hall and watch as he takes to beating both Andy and his mom with the belt, whipping and slapping them with the leather. I'll never forget the clapping sound it made against their skin. They huddle together as he beats them and beats them. Then he stops, walks outside to his truck and gets a beer. Andy's mom rushes to us, grabs all 3 of us, and stashes us behind the couch against the wall. Normally, this would be a crap hiding place, but they didn't ever clean their house, so junk and clothes and crap were everywhere. We laid back there and listened for an hour as Andy's dad kept beating his mom and getting beers from the truck till he finally passed out. She wasn't dead, just really effed up. She called the police and then had us leave before they got there. We walked around till the sun came up. Story 44. Not terrible as some of the horror stories here, but I'll go ahead cause it still bugs me for some reason. When I was about 7, my cousin came over to my house for a sleepover. Not long after she came, her best friend called and asked her to come to her house instead, which looking back is so rude, I can't believe her parents let her call my house to ask. Basically, then she was forced to ask me too, and this was the last time I was allowed to stay the night with anyone not family till high school. It was like 6 p.m. and I'd already had dinner, but this family was just sitting down to eat. I said I wasn't hungry, but they made me sit down and take a big plate of food. All of it stuff I hated. Like, the main dish was Kraft macaroni with like a couple cans of tuna mixed in. Maybe somebody here likes that, but to this day it sounds disgusting. And not just because I hate tuna. I refused to eat it, being not hungry and told to eat food I didn't like. I was polite about it. No thank you ma'am, etc. But these mother effers told me I was going to be punished and proceeded to make me sit at their table for over an hour alone while my cousin and her friend played. Then, an hour after that, we were forced to go to bed and we weren't allowed to get up or turn the light on, and I slept on the floor while they shared the bed. Just the most unwelcome I've ever felt in my life, and being treated like that by strangers made me never want to stay over with any of my own friends in case of a repeat. I was scared next time someone would hit me or something because you never know. No, OP, it's not just you. Kraft macaroni and cheese and tuna sounds like something that I probably would deny even if I was in prison and starving. That's horrible. Good for you for sticking to your guns and not eating that crap. Story 45. I've had pretty bad asthma my entire life. One time I stayed the night in one of my friend's houses on Christmas break. His mom had sprayed cinnamon scent spray in the house to make it feel like the holidays. I was sleeping on the floor while everyone was playing games when all of a sudden, I'm allergic to cinnamon spray. My chest gets tight and I begin to panic. I'm breathing in air hard, but not much is getting in. The mom of the house comes running in and throws me into the bathroom with the hot water on in the shower, hoping that the steam opens my chest while she's on the phone with 911. It's a real thing that you can stop breathing in a couple minutes and then you're motionless on the floor. If the paramedics have traffic or they just take a little too long, you could go brain dead. It's not like you just pass out and are sleeping. Your lungs have begun to swell shut. Long story short, the fire truck gets there and they give me an albuterol inhaler and an oxygen tank. Then my mom comes to get me. TLDR, asthma attack. I didn't die but could have. I was a little kid. Story 46. Pretty recent one. I was at my friend's house where I'd been before. I know her parents and they were always nice to me, but I knew they were horrible people from the stuff my friend told me. The fact that I was there without telling her parents ahead of time was also not allowed, but we always went to the gym on Wednesdays, so they could have known. I went to the toilet, and when I was in there, I heard her father starting to scream at her in a language I didn't understand. They're from Suriname. And I heard a very loud bang before a short silence, and the father walking away. I left the toilet directly after I knew he was gone and was so worried he hit my friend, but he didn't. He punched a hole in the wall. The worst was that my friend wasn't even scared. She looked ashamed. She apologized to me and was pissed that this happened while I was there. I already knew they were abusive, but that's when I realized how bad it is. She's moving out in half a year, as soon as she turns 18. She won't tell her parents where she's going and wants minimal to no contact. Me, her other friends, and her boyfriend will all help and support her. She's going to be okay. Story 47. Oh crap, finally a thread I can contribute to. We were at this Muslim friend's house, just chilling, and playing some of his home country music. Ambiental sounds and no actual lyrics, just shouts like, ah, oh, and so on. Can't put it better into words. Anyway, at one point the power goes out and the sounds and lights go off, so that was creepy enough on its own, but we continued talking like everything is fine. At this point, I have to mention that the music was playing on an old record player that used spinning CDs. Half an hour later, the power starts getting back up. The CD spins again without us noticing, obviously, and before we even process what's going on, a huge ooh like shout comes out from the stereo and everyone freaks out. That was the first and last time in my life I blacked out from how scared I was. It happened instantly, and I was in complete shock the first couple of seconds. Story 48. This happened last week. My mom and stepdad went out of town and hired a pet sitter for 5 days. I was feeling burnt out from work and needed to do Christmas shopping. She lives 2 hours away near a lot of good shopping, so I asked her if I could stay at her house for 2 days. She was happy because she could have a few days off the pet sitter and knew I was good with the dog. The first day, I pretty much sat around watching movies and hanging with the dog. The second day, I had to do shopping, but being lazy, scrolling through Reddit. I was maybe 5 minutes from leaving the house when I heard a noise outside. I stood up but realized it was the neighbor loading something into their truck. As my eyes shifted away from the truck, I saw smoke. It was coming from behind the couch, almost like when you blow out a candle, but I hadn't lit any candles. I go around to the back to see actual flames inside the couch. I was so confused, but I filled up a thing of water and threw it into the burning couch. I did it a few times to be safe, then reached in to feel for hot spots. The wood inside the couch was all hot to the touch. It eventually cooled down and the fire was out, but I was still pretty confused as to how the couch caught fire. Remember, they were supposed to have a pet sitter that wouldn't have been in the house for another 6 hours. I would have been shopping for at least 3 to 4 hours, and the house definitely would have burned, with the dog inside. I slid the small table that was behind the couch back into place, and noticed a focused beam of light on the couch. My mom likes to decorate and has a glass/crystal ball on the table. Now, I know this is a bad idea, but I don't really assess my mom's decorations very often. The crystal ball has been in the same spot on the same table with the same couch for almost a year with no issues. This one day where the sun came in at a perfect angle and I happened to decide to be at the house when nobody should have been there, the ball focused the beam into a fire starter. They would have lost the house, the dog, everyone's Christmas presents, everything, because of a stupid table ornament. I had a long talk with my mom about science when I saw her again. I stopped it before it got out of hand, but still, the random circumstance of the situation made it all very scary. Story 23. I'm late to the party, so this will probably get buried. When I was 7 or 8, my parents let me stay over at my friend's house for the very first time. Both of his parents had died when we were super young, so he was living with his aunt and her NFL lineman-sized boyfriend. My friend had his own room, but he had a set of bunk beds. I slept on the top bunk. In the middle of the night, I woke up and rolled over right into someone. I figured my friend got scared or something and came to the top bunk, so I rolled back over and fell asleep. I woke up a while later, rolled into what I thought was my buddy, rolled back the other way, into somebody else. I was petrified. Finally, after a minute of panic stillness, I call out my friend's name, just for his aunt's boyfriend to tell, "Boy, what the hell are you doing in here?" Turns out I had somehow sleptwalked out of the top bunk, across the hall, into his aunt's room, and gotten under the covers between his aunt and her BF. I was freaking out and couldn't figure out how to get out of the room in the dark. It's a funny story now, but it was a while before my mom let me go back there. Story 50. When I was 17, my friend was throwing a party while her parents were on a date night. With permission. We're all underage by a year, but have a few RTDs/beers/wines because most of our parents were happy to let us drink in that sort of environment. After a couple of hours, we're all in the kitchen watching a couple of guys do the cinnamon challenge. After the second guy had done it, one of the girls turned away from him and screamed. Behind us was a guy no one knew, maybe around 20 years old, blood pouring out of his nose and all over his face, hands, and t-shirt. A couple of the bigger guys step up and take him out of the house into the backyard. Find out he's been assaulted by some crackhead across the road. We all start clearing all the alcohol up, moving it into the girls' room because someone's calling an ambulance and the cops, and the host is calling her parents. 15 minutes later, we're all sitting around nervously in the lounge waiting for the cops to show up, holding cups of fizzy drink, probably looking suspicious as F. Eventually, they arrive, talk to a guy and a couple of us, and take the guy away with the ambulance. Shortly after they all leave, the girl's parents arrive. We get our alcohol back, not without someone spilling half a bottle of tequila on the girl's bed and a cup of G&T on the carpet, and they join us for the rest of the evening. Story 51. One time when I was like 15, I was staying the night with a good friend from school for the first time at his house. Me and him got really stoned before going back to his place, so we were forced to hide it from his parents, who were really against pot. It was easy to hide, as we just went to his basement and played PlayStation, avoiding all contact with his parents upstairs. After a while, when we weren't so ridiculously high, we went outside to play a game of basketball in the driveway. His dad came outside and joined us. We played a game of 21, and his dad ended up winning. I had a combination of cotton mouth and got some sweat on my tongue, so I spit on the concrete driveway, which I soon found out was a huge mistake. His dad screamed at me, immediately telling me I was disrespectful and how he believed I'd come to be a bad influence on his son. Then he gave me his cell phone and demanded I call my parents to come get me. At one point, his dad was demanding I tell him how much my father makes a year and completely belittled me and my family, claiming we were what's wrong with the world today. The screaming I was getting from this man I had just met and still being a little bit high, and the awkward tension I felt for my friend from his dad acting like a lunatic on a 15-year-old kid for spitting on the driveway was about to send me into a straight panic attack. My parents came and picked me up across the street because his father refused to let me wait on his property. For some reason, this situation still gets to me a little bit to this day, just from how incredibly paranoid I was from being high and how quickly his mood shifted from something so little. A few months after that, his mom divorced his dad because he was incredibly mentally abusive and a very big alcoholic. So we've got teenagers getting stoned in the basement, going upstairs and playing basketball in the driveway, and a dad that gets angry and yells at kids. Does this not sound like an episode of That 70s Show to anyone else? No? Just me? Really? Okay, whatever. Moving on. Story 52. I was 14 and my best friend was 15. I was sleeping over on the day before Christmas. His family lived in an upper-class neighborhood. Anyways, his room was up on the second floor and we were still up around midnight effing crap up in the TV room to the point where his dad yells, "Y'all better get the F in bed or I'm gonna come up there and kick y'all's ass," and shut us up real quick. Fast forwards to around 2:30 a.m. and I hear this loud, and I mean loud, banging on some wall, followed by his dad yelling, "Get the F back or I'm gonna shoot!" And then more banging. His dad yells for my friend to wake up and call the police ASAP. So here I am with my friend, all groggy, not realizing what's happening, and the next thing we hear is the most terrifying scream I've ever heard in my life. Like some woman was crying bloody murder. My stomach dropped immediately, and I realized some crap was going down, like right now. His dad ran into his bedroom and returned to the front door with his gun and exits the house to run to the neighbor's house where we think this intruder had gone. My friend is on the phone trying to explain the situation to the police, but all this information I'm telling you now is what we found out after, so he was confused on what to say, just that the police needed to come as we heard a woman screaming. Police arrive in less than 5 minutes and arrive to what is his dad pointing his gun at these two grown-ass muscular men wrestling in the ground yelling, "You better subdue him right now!" and take over from there. An ambulance comes and the neighbors are all outside trying to see what's going on, and the police come up to us and tell us that the man was on drugs and he was the one screaming because he thought he was dying. We talked to the neighbor, one of the muscular dudes, and he told me and my friend that they were trying that synthetic marijuana, aka spice, that had been circling around, and his friend freaked the F out, hopped the fence, ran away, got lost, came back and went to the wrong house, and started banging on the front door, aka my friend's house. When he realized it was the wrong house and heard the word gun, it sent him on a rampage and he thought he was dead and started screaming at the top of his lungs. His friends had to tackle him to the ground because he didn't want him to attack anyone. Dumbass almost actually got shot that night because my friend's dad thought he was some kind of intruder / killed someone next door. My friend and I were shook up for a bit as we were just kids. Saw his face and he had some of the biggest, craziest eyes I've ever seen. TLDR. Slept over at a friend's house the night before Christmas and his dad almost shot some guy on drugs trying to break into the house. Moral of the story, don't do drugs. And if you do any drugs, I recommend the mellow kind. Like weed. Real weed. The kind that makes you kill a bag of chips. Story 53. Not scary, but it freaked me out nonetheless. So I had spent a week during a summer at a friend's house. Friend had moved to the next city over, but we kept in touch. While there, we went to a friend of hers house. I didn't really know this other girl other than she was, quote, kind of weird but funny, and had a splatterhouse for the TG-16. Instant friend for me. Anyway, her parents had gone out and it was just the three of us, plus some kids from the neighborhood, so we decided to play hide-and-go-seek in her big house. It was late and dark, which made it more fun. I go into a bathroom on the second floor where all the lights were out. It was practically pitch black because the window was small and the blinds were drawn. Smelled funny inside, but what bathroom doesn't? I leave the lights off and go into the tub to hide. I hear a squishy noise and I feel things crawling on my feet, so I scream and jump out and turn on the lights. The tub was filled with bugs! I don't know why, I didn't care. I just screamed and ran down the street. Weird Girl's brother, who ran track, had to catch up to me. Never went back there. Edit. Oh, I just remembered another friend. Her cat knew how to say hello, and she never told me this tidbit of info. So imagine sleeping in a guest room by yourself, and a cat walks in through the door you swore you shut, meowing, "Hello." Story 54. When I was younger, I was babysitting for a friend of my mom's. Way out in the middle of nowhere. The phone rings, and when I answer, there's a lot of static, but someone asks if Shelly is home. I tell him that she's not, and the phone cuts off. A minute later, it rings again, and the man says, "Is this Sammy Lou?" I tell him it is, and the phone hangs up again. He calls right back and asks if I'm babysitting for Shelly. I'm starting to get uncomfortable, so I tell him that Shelly will be home soon, if he wants to call back later. A few minutes later, the phone rings again. I don't answer, and it just keeps ringing. I finally answer and hear, "What if I want to talk to you?" The phone hangs up, and it's quiet for a while. An hour later, it rings, and all I can hear is static, and then, "Can I come over and talk to you?" I hung up. Then another call. "I'm coming to see you." I go check on the kid and check all the windows. I turn on the porch light and look at the yard through the glass in the door. The phone rings again, and there's just static. After a minute, the static clears, and I hear his voice crystal clear. "You just turned on the porch light. Does that mean I can come in?" Like, is there a sequel to this? Why do you just cut the story off at the climax? Gotta know what happened. Jeez. Obviously you survived, but man, what happened? Story 55. I would stay over pretty regularly at a friend's house with another mutual friend. Let's call them J and B. The first few nights we stayed, we slept in a guest room, 2 beds. They had this cabinet in there with a few china dolls. They were so pretty, and my friend B loved them dearly. The other friend J did not. Said they creeped them out and made her uncomfortable. I didn't mind them too much, except one doll with long black hair and a blood-red dress. That one made me uncomfortable. Jay was with me this night, so I know I didn't dream it or make it up. Crap really happened, and I'll never trust dolls again. I'm a very light sleeper, and I remember waking and sitting up in bed, groggy as F, and wondering what woke me. I had a vague notion that there was an out-of-place noise somewhere. I look over, and Jay is awake too. Now, Jay is a heavy sleeper. Once they're out, they're down for the night, but something woke them up. Jay looks scared crapless, looking at the floor between us, and when I looked, the red doll is sitting in the space between our beds. At first, I'm just annoyed. I figured B snuck in and placed the doll there to F with us. Poor Jay was absolutely terrified. I say effing B, but as soon as I start talking, this piece of crap doll stands up on its own. I don't even think about it. I'm out that door and in B's room before it even registered I moved. Jay had vaulted themselves over the floor onto my bed and followed. B never believed us. We went back the next morning and the doll was back in the case like it never moved. She really believes we were just effing with her. Thankfully, B has a massive bed, so every time we slept over, we would all just share a bed. Jay won't even look at the guest room. But F that doll. I hate that thing. Story 56. When I was 8, I was staying at my aunt's house for the summer, because my aunt is badass and had a swimming pool. She had to work one day, teacher, summer off, and took me to a babysitter, who was another teacher that didn't have to go to the seminar my aunt was attending. I had never met the lady before, but she seemed very nice, and on the way, my aunt told me they had a dog. I was super excited because I love dogs. And when we got there, the lady told my aunt that the dog was staying in another room with the door closed because she was acting funny. I remember being really sad about it, and they knelt down and told me whatever I do, don't go in the room with the doggy because it's not feeling well. While they walk out to the driveway to chat as my aunt leaves, I decided it was important that I check on the sick doggy myself, as perhaps a few pets would help it to feel better. So I open the door, look in the room, and this big, fat basset hound named Morgan is just chilling on the ground asleep. I crept in, squatted down to where I was nose to nose with her, and started petting her head gently as I said, "Morgan, are you okay?" And then everything went red. The next thing I know, I'm in a hospital, getting a crap load of shots, and my nose is dangling from my face. Blood all over me, and the woman was crying and screaming at my aunt. The doctors made her leave, and I passed out. I woke up again, and there was a huge needle going in my eye. Woke up again, and family/friends were there, as they told me they took skin from my butt cheek and used it on my face. I didn't understand until a few days later, I think, what had actually happened. Basically, the dog in question was actually supposed to be in quarantine for 10 days because it ate a bat or something. It was showing signs of rabies, and the woman had refused to take it in because she thought they would for sure put it to sleep. Instead, she was keeping it in her room and telling the vet the dog passed away or some such bullcrap. She told my aunt the dog was sick when it was really rabid. It bit half my nose almost completely off, and they said that when they ran in the room after hearing me scream, it had been jerking me around like a rag doll. That's when they pulled her off me and she tried to bite the owner. The owner then screamed at me, according to my aunt, that she told me not to go in there, and my aunt was screaming, "What the F is wrong with your damn dog?" Apparently, the fight in the hospital was because the woman told the police that showed up at my room, I have no idea why, that I must have hit or provoked the dog, and that she was not showing any signs of weird behavior before that. Then she left the hospital and returned with flowers and basically told my aunt she wasn't going to cover any of the bill and that the flower basket would be it, nor did she plan on taking her dog in. The cops, I think, went and had to physically get animal control involved, and I ended up with a bunch of stitches, a weird scar, and a tomato nose, and everyone at school called me Chew Toy for a year. It all worked out though in the end, because my aunt took me to the Olive Garden with my mom, and I got cake and a stuffed toy, and I didn't even end up getting any rabies. Yay! Needless to say, that woman with the rabid dog and my aunt had a very strained work relationship after that, and I'm prone to sinus infections, but it's okay. I was actually kind of bummed for the dog, and I never get nose to nose with any animal now. Story 57. When I was 14 years old, I was house/dog sitting for my older brother in his new house. Anyway, my brother has 2 Great Danes and a Rottweiler who I chalked up to being softies because they never showed any type of aggression and were always so loving towards me. So that night I stayed up to about 1 a.m., and around 3 a.m., I wake up to a jerk from one of the Great Danes, and then I hear a loud bang and the dogs take off. No barking, no howling, just silently and quickly take off running downstairs. I hear loud screams for help a few seconds later and run downstairs to this guy getting one leg gnawed on by the Great Dane and the Rottweiler latched onto his arm and the other Great Dane nipping at any open space he could find. The neighbor hears all the commotion and runs to the house yelling for me. I open the door and show him what's going on. He tells me to call the cops and to grab the dogs, all the while he has a pistol pointed at the burglar. After the dogs are put up, the cops promptly show up with ambulance in tow. From what my brother told me, the guy lost his arm up to below his elbow and now walks with a limp. We know this because I guess in prison he found religion, and when he came out, he visited my brother asking for forgiveness and wanted to talk to me, but my brother wasn't having that, even though by then I was already in college. Story 58. I was on a night out drinking with a girlfriend of mine. She said I could crash at hers that night. Some dancing and a few drinks later, and she'd met some guy at the bar that she seemed pretty taken with. He invited her back to his, and she was playing all coy while secretly slipping me her house keys, telling me to let myself in and crash there as promised. I stayed out drinking with friends and she left with the guy. Hours later, must be around 2 a.m., I hitch a bus back to her house and stumble through the front door. I could see the living room light was on, which was odd as my friend lived alone and I hadn't remembered us leaving it on. I walked into the room, chucked my handbag on the sofa, switched the light off and made my way upstairs. I swung the bedroom door open and threw myself onto the bed. Didn't bother turning the light on and was too drunk to bother removing clothes. I must have passed out pretty quickly. I woke up about an hour later because of a noise. I wasn't sure what the noise was, but I sleepily turned my head in the direction I thought it had come from. The wall along the side of the bed featured fitted wardrobes with those sliding mirrored doors so I could see myself, the bed, and the floor. I fell back to sleep and woke up again because of a loud noise. I remember the bedroom clock saying it was about 3:30 a.m. I turned my head again to look at the wardrobes, and this time I could see a glimmer of light in its reflection, coming from under the bed. Without moving, I peered close at the glimmer, and in the darkness, I slowly made out two eyes blinking wildly with some white teeth smiling back at me. Someone was under the bed and must have been there this whole time. I felt this cold panic wash over me, as if I was paralyzed, and I wasn't sure what to do. In what felt like hours passing, obviously just a few seconds, I calculated that my handbag was in the living room and thought out the route to the front door. I counted down from 3, and then, quick as a flash, I bolted out of the bed, down the stairs, grabbed my bag out of the living room, and hauled ass down the street as fast as I could. I called the police once I'd felt I'd run so far that my legs were going to fall off. When they arrived at the house, the guy was still under the bed. If I had gone in the kitchen when I arrived at the house, I would have found the back door's window smashed in with the door hanging open. The guy was apparently completely harmless. He'd walked out of his private ward a mile or so away, which housed people with mental illnesses and severe learning difficulties. He had a childlike personality and always wanted to play, so to him it was just a fun game. But yeah, woof. Story 59. My hometown has 2 towns in it. One upper class, the other lower class that shared schools and such. My family was from the upper middle class side, his from the lower side. To give an idea about the divide, my parents' house is about $700,000 more than his father's house, from current realtor websites' prices. I grew up to respect adults and generally be a good kid. My father was a firefighter with a lucrative side business, so I learned decent morals and wasn't some spoiled rich kid. We met because of our high school's football program. He was a good kid, smart and in honors/AP classes like me. I went over to his house one day, and the second I step in the door, his father is there, shirtless and obviously drunk. Me, being the polite kid I was raised to be, said, "Hello, Mr. Last Name. I'm Steven. It's nice to meet you." His response, "Who the hell are you calling me mister? Do I look like a old effing man to you?" I'm extremely taken aback and try to explain that it's just a term of respect for an adult. That didn't work out as well as I thought it would. His next sentence directed to his son was, "Has he been initiated yet?" So I'm visibly uncomfortable at this point. My mind's racing. I've never met anyone like this besides homeless people in Chicago. He ends up making me take a spoonful of some super hot sauce. Never went back. That was an extremely uncomfortable situation for my privileged ass. Story 60. Finally, I have an opportunity to tell this story. Years ago, when I was 20-ish, I was dating a guy who had very wealthy friends, like billionaire wealthy. We were definitely not wealthy. Boyfriend and I were traveling to a vacation spot in Maine and had stopped to spend the night in the home of the grandmother of my BF's wealthy friend. The friend was going to travel on with us the next day. The grandmother's house was an enormous mansion, probably the biggest home I've ever been inside. I was pretty intimidated by it all, and I went to bed in my own room early. In the middle of the night, I woke up super alert for some reason. The house was silent and pitch black, but I found myself getting out of bed and wandering around the house. Now, this is something totally outside my character. I'm a respectful house guest and would never go exploring or snoop in the dark in someone's home, especially the elderly owner of a huge mansion. I didn't even know why I was doing it. It was just this compulsion. Soon, I descended the stairway to the ground floor and continued my wandering. After 10 minutes, I started to hear a small noise, almost like a cat or a baby crying. Still in the dark, I made my way towards the sound, and I found our friend's elderly grandmother on the floor, weakly calling for help. She'd gone to the bathroom in the middle of the night and fallen. Of course, I raced to get my BF, and we helped her back to bed. She was very grateful. Family thanked me, etc. The next morning over breakfast, one of the family suddenly asked me how I'd found her. What was I doing up at that hour? The house was so huge, I couldn't possibly have heard her weak cries until I was in her room. I suddenly realized I had no idea why I woke up so suddenly in a strange house and started wandering around. I still have no explanation about it to this day. Story 61. Soon after meeting my future wife, I crashed at her house a couple times after a night out when I was too tired to drive back to my own apartment. At the time, her dad was out of the country for a month, but her mom was very much at home. The plan was to sleep a few hours and bone out before her mom got up in the morning. It worked. Twice. The third time I woke up in the middle of the night, I was facing the wall and froze when I sensed a presence in the room. It was pitch black and completely silent, but I knew with 100% certainty that her mom was standing over us in the dark, glaring at me lying in her 21-year-old daughter's bed. I heard no breathing, no nightgown rustling, nothing, but I knew. I've never expended so much energy to be rock still before or since. I eventually fell asleep without having heard a sound, and I never confirmed if it actually happened before she died of cancer. Story 62. I was about 4 or 5 years old, and my sister was 2 years older, 6 to 7 at the time. We had been dropped off at my parents' friend's house to be babysat for a few hours. They had several kids, one my age, one a year older than my sister, and one several years older than all of us. I don't know what set it off, but at one point the dad was chasing the oldest kid around the house with a belt, threatening to whip him if he could catch him or get to him. I was completely effing terrified that somehow I might get caught or beaten just because I was in the same room. I was not a stranger to spankings or even a few shots on my butt with a ping pong paddle or tennis shoe for corporal punishment. However, it was usually metered out as a specific response to a specific action. Sure, it was going to be uncomfortable, but I never felt in mortal danger from a spanking. I felt in mortal danger that day for simply being there and not for anything I had or had not done. I'm grateful that there was no physical violence in my home growing up, but just a few hours in that situation has given me a lifelong appreciation of how much small amounts of physical violence in a home can affect a child. Story 63. I was about 12, I think, and I had a best friend named Lauren for a year before she abruptly moved away. I could tell her family was a bit off. Her dad was rarely home, and her mom seemed kind of frazzled all the time. One day, I went over to her house, and after we had spaghetti for dinner, we went up to her room. I was sitting down in her bed when her dad, a towering white man, and his friend, a fat black man, came into her room and told her to leave. The friend sat down on the bed next to me while her dad stood by the door. The friend asked if I was cool. Like, you're cool, right? As if prepping me. And it worked. I could tell something was wrong, but I did want to seem cool, and my stomach was squirmy from dinner, and my breath smelled bad. And after, I confirmed that, yeah, I'm definitely cool. They kind of side-eyed each other and left. That was it. Lauren came back in, and things went back to normal. I never saw her dad again, and she moved a few months later. No clue WTF that was about, but it was intense and still puts me on edge to think about it. Story 64. I was at a friend's house, and him and I were messing around in the backyard, and his sister, who was probably 7 to 8 at the time, I was 15, decided she wanted to come out and play with us. By play, I mean basically hit me with a plastic baseball bat. At some point, I got tired of it, so when she tried hitting me with it, I just tried shoving it away. I ended up pushing near her wrist, and the backside of the bat just smacked her in the face. A hard, instant moment of yikes, and she's crying and spits out a tooth into her hand. She basically runs inside screaming like she was shot, and her dad comes out and calls my friend in. Dad walks outside and comes to talk to me, and I don't think I blinked in minutes. At this point, I've spewed out as many I'm sorries to fit a 5-year budget and probably have the face of someone being sentenced to life in prison. He then just calmly asked me what happened and then explained to me that the tooth was already very loose and was ready to come out any minute. I've never been so relieved in my life. Story 65. We used to have a neighbor who lived by himself. He was young, Italian, seemed super cool to 12-year-old me, would talk to us across the fence all the time when he was outside smoking. My parents let us talk to him over the fence, but never let us go to his house, even though he invited us across multiple times. Well, one day, parents are out, and another of my friends was already over there for some reason. They were both pressuring me to come across the fence and hang out with them in the house, and I, being the idiot 12-year-old, was like, what could possibly go wrong? Get over there and they're trying to offer various alcoholic drinks, cigarettes, homemade food, etc. The house reeks, and there's creepy religious decorations all over the place. In many ways, the smell of stale cigarettes and presumably dead bodies turned me off drinking and eating there, and I managed to make up a reason to leave and pretty much avoided both the adult neighbor and the similar-aged friend since then. Parents got hella mad when they found out I went there from my snitch sister. It was only several years later, when he was arrested for what I'm sure you can take a random guess at, that I realized perhaps why my parents weren't super keen on me going there, which makes me wonder whether my friend at the time was groomed or similar. Either way, dodged quite the bullet. I'm confident my parents didn't know in advance, never knew if he was, for example, a SAer, but must have gotten odd vibes off him, so good parent sense, I suppose. Story 66. During summer breaks in high school, I went to my friend who lives on an island. His family is renting rooms. There's a terrace that's under some trees for natural shade. I think it was a plum or a fig tree. The fruit falls on the ground, but birds and other animals pick them up and eat them. You got through that to hang the laundry. 8 months prego, friend's sister is helping with laundry. As I'm finishing up and going back to the house, I hear behind my back that friend's sister has fallen. I turn around and see that she slipped on a piece of fruit and that she has fallen on the exit where there are 3 small steps. As I rush to her, she's in pain and shock and just saying, "I'm okay," and repeating it. As I help her back to the house, she's starting to cry more and more. She doesn't say a word until she enters the house to talk with her mom, and I stay outside talking to my friend about what happened. After a minute, we both hear her screaming hysterically, "I can't feel him anymore!" This goes on for 5 minutes, where she starts crying again, but out of joy that she felt the baby kick. They're both okay, and the baby is now 10 years old. Story 67. Oof, finally, a story I can't tell. I'm not a good storyteller, but please bear with me. Growing up without a father and a mother working 2 jobs, I was raised part-time by a Puerto Rican family of 10. My mother met my best friend's, at the time, mother, and made the agreement that I was to be babysat by them while mom was at work. This went on for nearly a decade. Maybe 5 years in, I had to be at least 10 years old. I was spending the night at Ed's house as usual. But this night was entirely different. This night was like any other. We played GameCube and watched Toonami throughout the night, maybe staying up till about 11 or 12. Once we tired out, it was off to bed to resume in the morning. Sleep was easy, as we were always eager to get up and resume our fun. But something was unusual. I woke up deep into the middle of the night. I don't know why, but I felt a sinking feeling deep in my chest. Now, before I explain what happened, I need to set up the surroundings. We're in Ed's room, which has a bunk bed. I normally sleep in the top bunk, the best bunk. And Ed has a dresser, for clothes of course, about top bunk height with a small TV on top that we used to play video games and watch anime on. Now, it's maybe 3 to 5 a.m. No one is awake but me, and the light is on in the hallway. The door to our room is open, illuminating about 33% of the room. I look at the TV and there's a shadowy figure in it. It's more of a reflection really, but I couldn't tell you what it was. Now just a bit about myself. My entire childhood, whenever I was faced with terror, I was the type of person to freeze. Whether being bullied or confronted by an unpleasant, aggressive person, my immediate action is to just freeze. I don't know why and for how long, but that's just what I would do. So I froze, stricken with an insane, heart-pounding, sweat-inducing fear. And I stared at the figure on the TV for what felt like an eternity. I stared until my body gave out and I drifted back to sleep. I don't know what that figure was, but I've always remembered it. Over 20 years later, I still think about it. It doesn't scare me anymore, and I believe there's a logical explanation for it, but that was by far the scariest, most supernatural thing I've ever experienced. Story 68. 17 or 18 at the time. Me and another friend went to our mutual friend's house to play video games. His parents were out of town. It's pretty late, like 2 or 3 a.m., and we decide to go for a last smoke before bed. It's really raining hard, so the guy who lives there said we could smoke inside the garage. So me and my buddy go into the garage, light up a cigarette, and start chatting a bit. All of a sudden, whilst just looking around, I noticed the washing machine, which was turned on for washing clothes, obviously, and I look at the window and I see the palm of a hand on the inside of the little round glass. It was not like a dead-looking hand, but really a hand that pressed the window. I was like, WTF, thinking I saw some illusion or something. I look at my buddy to tell him what I saw, and he's looking super pale and also staring at the washing machine. Without asking, I knew he saw the same. We went outside immediately after that, told our friend, the guy who lived there, what we saw and tried to laugh it away. But he goes dead serious. Oh, you saw the hand. Yeah, I've seen it a few times too. He stayed super calm under it like it was super normal. So after a while cooling down, we were both sure he was pranking us. So a few hours later, we told him to go to the garage with us and empty the clothes out of the washing machine. Never saw anything but clothes coming out of it. Never went back to that house, and we still can't explain that night. Story 70. I was 7. I went to my friend's house for the 3rd time ever. It was notable because just getting to go over to his house was always a hassle. I always figured it was just because they were embarrassed because they were less well off than most. Well, anyways, the one unifying factor of all my visits was that his father was passed out on his recliner, and we weren't supposed to go into the garage. Well, this time, however, my friend felt like being a cool guy and going into the garage anyways, since his mom was away and his dad seemed to be out like a rock. Didn't notice it at first, but after a few minutes of effing around, we turned around to go back inside, and I noticed the big-ass Nazi flag on the back wall of the garage with a bunch of other Nazi imagery. SS, 1488, etc. I had until that moment never been more scared in my life, but I kept my mouth shut until we got back to my friend's room. Once we got back, I immediately started asking questions. I can't remember everything I asked now, as I was speaking a mile a minute, and I won't go into details of my friend's replies, but turns out his father is not a good dude. I wouldn't learn the terms neo-Nazi and domestic abuse until several years later, but I knew it was very wrong. I wasn't done questioning my friend when we heard his father moving in the living room. Then the garage door opening, and after a few minutes, it slamming shut and loud stomping coming towards his room. I remember him saying, "You should get out of here." I didn't think twice. I ran out the door and saw the most purely enraged human I've ever seen. That became the new scariest moment of my life. I was genuinely afraid for my life, but he was between me and the door. I ran directly at him and slid between his legs and ran for the front door. I imagine it must have looked really cool in retrospect, but at the moment, I was just happy to be outside. As I came outside, his mother and my own were just arriving. I remember telling his mother she needed to save her son, and then, as soon as she was headed towards the door, telling my mom I wanted to leave right then. Sorry this went a little long, but it's just etched in my memory forever. Until that day, I thought Nazis were a thing of the past, an evil we defeated in a long ago time. Story 71. At my best friend's 12th birthday party, I lost my phone somewhere in the house. After my group of friends tore the house apart, my best friend's cell phone rang. It was a call from my lost phone. We all looked at each other and she answered. The only thing on the other line was heavy breathing and gnashing sounds. We flipped and ran downstairs to find her dad. Halfway through explaining what had just happened, her phone gets another call from my lost phone. This time, her dad ripped it out of her hands and answered, demanding to know who it was. He was greeted with the same response as we had, heavy breathing and gnashing. At this point, we're all freaking out, and her dad picked up the landline to call the cops. At that moment, her mom screamed and saw a phone light out in the dark backyard. The dad bolted out there to fight whoever it was. We rushed to the window and saw none other than her massive white Malamute slobbering all over my crushed phone that he had been using as his chew toy for the last hour it had gone missing. He must have pressed the call button, calling the last person I had called, my best friend. A relief, except for the fact my phone was toast. TLDR, lost my phone at my friend's house. It called my best friend with noises only a killer could make. Dog had been chomping on phone outside. So I'm just gonna assume that this was at least 10 years ago, back before phones were like frickin' adamantium indestructible war machines. Because there is no way that a dog can chew up a modern Droid or iPhone. I just can't envision that scenario. So yeah, we'll give you the benefit of the doubt. Probably a BlackBerry or something. You guys remember those? Anyway, moving on. Story 72. Went to a girls' night at a coworker's house. Upon arriving, they had their dogs closed in a room and they were whining. My friend and I mentioned that we love dogs and they can be let out if that was okay. The girl who owned the house mentions they're a little rowdy, but they would love to be out. She goes to the door and opens it. Just stepping out of the way as two large pit bull shepherd mixes rip out of the bedroom. They look pissed and terrifying. I held my hands down in a defense stance and instantly had my hand in the mouth of the boy dog. He was ripping my hand around and growling. Blood was landing on their wall and carpet, and I was sobbing. It took them to kick his legs out from under him to finally let go, and my hand was torn open and bleeding everywhere. When we got to the ER, I had to get stitches, x-rays, and shots. They also informed me that if my wrist was bitten with just a little more pressure, I would have had my veins torn into as well. It was extremely traumatic, and upon reporting it, we found out that their same dog had also attacked their baby nephew not long before, biting his face. I missed a full 4 days of work and had to be on strong antibiotics, and this coworker threw a huge fit about having to pay for my bills and medication. It was by far the worst experience I've ever had while at someone else's house. Story 73. I was hanging out with my best friend, her roommate, and her male friend in Atlanta, which makes 4 of us. It was around 2 a.m. by the time we got tired, so when we got back to the apartment, we all got ready for bed and fed the dogs. There were 2 dogs in the apartment. One of them was a black lab, which belonged to her roommate, and the other was a Yorkie that we were babysitting for a friend who had some things to take care of. I ended up having to sleep in the living room couch, which was right by the front door and the Yorkie's cage. I finally go to sleep around 4 a.m., and 20 minutes into my sleep, the Yorkie is barking like he'd just seen a ghost, so I get up and tell him to be quiet. He's quiet for another 20 minutes and then starts going crazy again. At this point, I could hear the black lab barking in the other room. Dogs have hoodoo voodoo senses, so I knew something was off. Before I could get up and tell the Yorkie to be quiet, I hear this bang, bang, bang on the front door. I felt the vibrations from it. It literally sounded like someone was using a blunt object to break the door down. I stood there completely frozen, trying to process what just happened, so I run into my best friend's room and tell her that someone is banging on the front door trying to break in. She's half asleep, then says, "It's probably just the people upstairs making hella noise. They do it from time to time." So I said, F it. I went back into the living room and sat in the kitchen table because the F is about to just go back to sleep while someone was trying to break in. It was 5 a.m. and I decided I was just going to wait until the sun came up to go back to sleep. I also had an object with me to use as a weapon just in case. 10 minutes go by and my best friend comes running out of her room like, "There's someone on the effing balcony!" At this point, everybody in the apartment was awake, ready to F some crap up. So we all go into her room and look at the balcony, and I kid you not, there's this big black mass moving on the balcony, and it was so dark we couldn't make out what it was. I'm looking at this thing on the balcony in horror, thinking that wendigos and shapeshifters actually exist. At this point, we called the police and were trying to figure out what the hell we were going to do until the police got there. We were in Atlanta and break-ins are pretty common in the city, but this was just completely absurd. So the male friend comes out of the room and says, "Y'all, that is Joyce on the effing balcony." Joyce was the Yorkie's owner, the one who was supposed to be out taking care of things, but instead she was so drunk that she decided to try and break into the apartment instead of calling/texting us to let her in. Man, my best friend was livid and had a long talk with her. We were relieved, but the whole principle of the situation was extremely terrifying. She could have been a serial killer, a burglar, anything, and we were grateful that nothing happened and no one got hurt. The police did come, 45 minutes later. We weren't happy about that either. I still think about this from time to time, though. What if it was a different situation? What if it wasn't Joyce? What if someone had gotten hurt? What if the police hadn't showed up at all if something did happen? We were all truly terrified knowing that other people have been in much more unfortunate situations like this. I know this all may sound a bit dramatic, but it has definitely made me a bit paranoid at night, and I'm constantly checking to make sure all my doors are locked. Story 74. I convinced my friend, I'll call her S, to throw a birthday party for herself at her house. Everything was going so great. We all invited our own groups of friends, so there were all kinds of interesting people in and out having a great time. Well, early on in the night, a guy that one of S's friends had brought got way too drunk and was making all the women at the party super uncomfortable, walking up to them all and saying really weird, inappropriate stuff. A bunch of us girls got together in the backyard and talked about it. Turns out literally every girl had been approached and skeeved out by him. So S and I tell the guy, hey man, you gotta go. You can't be doing that. Have a great night. He gets super angry and storms off down the street, leaving his car. We think he'll be back when he's sober and pick it up tomorrow morning. No biggie. Flash forward about an hour and I hear screaming from the front living room. We all run to see what's up, and the dude is back, and he has the girl he came with by the hair in the front yard. He's screaming at her and yanking her around. All the men run out and start to yell at the guy and get the girl away. I get her inside and have her lock herself in the bathroom in case he gets in the house. This guy not only pulls a knife in the mess of people and makes a few stabs, but also punches my friend S in her mouth. Everyone let loose on him. He got his ass beat up and down the street. The scary part is when we thought he had left again, he had actually gotten into his car, and while a huge group of us were in the front yard checking everyone and making sure they were okay, not stabbed, etc., he floored it through the yard, missing us by feet, flipped around, and did that 4 or 5 more times, getting closer until he was just driving directly at people. We were diving left and right, trying not to get hit. A couple people got dinged by his mirrors. One guy smashed his arm pretty bad. No major injuries though, thank God. The cops showed up and barricaded the entire street, and at gunpoint dragged him out of his car and ordered us all back into the house. He went to jail and S immediately had his car towed. Surprisingly, we ended up continuing the party. A lot of us needed a drink after that. The girl in the bathroom went home safe, and S had one hell of a story to tell. Story 75. 19. My first serious relationship since starting college. Was going to his house for a home-cooked dinner on Valentine's Day. I get there, and I'm absolutely blown away with how beautiful the place is. In an expensive neighborhood, 3 floors, as far as I knew, the man worked in retail, so I was shocked. We're eating dinner when cops come in from all sides, guns drawn. Turns out he did not own the house. His friend cleaned the house for the real owners and tipped him off that they'd be going on vacation that week. What he did not know is that they were leaving their 16-year-old daughter at home, who called 911 when she realized people were in the house. Thankfully, they realized I had no idea what was going on and let me go. He had to go to court, though. Story 76. Super late to the party, and I don't think I've ever told this to anyone, but here goes. I still fathom revenge on this F-tard. When I was a kid, I'm guessing 10 to 12, maybe younger, I was friends with this kid down the road from me. Pretty rural area. Closer friends had moved away. This guy was basically the only one around my age within a distance I was allowed to travel. Real dunce of a guy who was older than me, but a grade or 2 below me. From trashy parents living in a trashy trailer that was a real eyesore for the area. I once watched this guy douse his household trash with gasoline in their burn pile, then bend over it at the waist to light it, roasting his stupid effing face with a huge exploding flame. I should have listened to my parents when they said they didn't like him and thought I shouldn't hang around him, but I'm sure that made me want to rebel and spitefully hang around him anyway, even though I really didn't care for the guy. We played video games, explored the woods, tore crap up, rode ATVs, etc. Until one day he shows me his dad's revolver, and we were the only ones home. I'm not sure what caliber it was, and I'm certain he didn't even check the cylinder to see if it was loaded. Cool, I like guns, I thought. Then I watched his face as he went through the thought process. Like a light bulb went off in his head, like he had the greatest idea ever. He looks from the gun to me with a smirk, then points the effing thing at me. I said something like, "Alright dude, that's not cool, stop pointing it at me." I tried walking to the side out of the line of fire. He kept it trained on me. I'm still telling him to stop. I start walking out of his parents' room and he's following me, still aiming at me. I start running to the other end of their trailer to a bedroom, dodging trash with every step. He's running after me, and he's laughing. I get to the bedroom and he's still right behind me. I'm sure I'm crying at this point. I cower on the floor on my back/side, knees up, hands in front of my face like I'm going to block a bullet if it comes, crying and begging him to stop. And he's just standing over me, laughing at me, and aiming his gun down directly at my face. In my mind, I had no idea if he was capable of pulling the trigger on purpose, and if he would do something like that to me. And I also knew how effing accidents happen, and even though I was sure he was just being an a-hole, I was just waiting for this idiot to accidentally discharge this gun right into my skull. After he finally stopped pointing it at me, I ran out to my bicycle and rode home as fast as I could, never going back. Every time I pass that effing house, sometimes even now, 20 years later when visiting my parents' home, I start thinking of that day and how I could have/should have/maybe one day still will exact revenge on that piece of crap, or at the least find out about his life crumbling. Damn, that thought brought out some old feelings. F you, Tommy, you tub of lard mother effer. Story 77. Probably doesn't compare to other stories on here, but I was 7 to 8. at my friend's house, and his grandpappy made homemade pizza. It was bomb. About an hour later, I get the grumble guts and head to the restroom, and proceed to demolish it. It was terrifying. I didn't know my butt could be so aggressive. Cherry on top was trying to throw up in the toilet without getting off it. Spread my legs a little wider and thought I was good, but a minor miscalculation in volume led me to blow chunks all over the toilet seat, floor, and rug, as well as my legs and tallywhacker. Got even scarier because I still felt sick, but my dad raised me to be courteous, so I was afraid to leave that huge mess everywhere. Wrapped up the drainage process and tried to wipe it all up with toilet paper. Did a pretty good job until I tried to flush it and, that's not going down. In fact, it's coming up, and pretty darn quick. So I, crying and still half naked, run out of the bathroom straight past my friend and his super cute sister up to their grandpa and tell him what happened. And he tells me not to worry and thanks me for trying. Unbelievably nice dude, and made me feel even guiltier for wrecking the place. He goes in and comes back out like 10 minutes later after clearing the clog and mopping it all up. Clearly not his first rodeo, and calls my dad to come get me because I was still visibly sick. Invited me back the next week. Dinner was bomb again. Loved the experience, and they were still super warm and friendly, but I never saw that bathroom rug again. Grandparents are awesome. Old people are awesome. They're like, oh, so you just totally destroyed the bathroom and my favorite rug? Don't worry about it, buddy. Why don't you come on out? I'll clean it up, and, you can come back next week when you're feeling better. I mean, who else is going to do that except for a grandma or grandpa? Beautiful! Story 78. I was invited to a party at a friend's house. Her mother had rented the place for a few months, and it was kind of a crap hole. I was young and stupid, and I was totally into trance parties. I joined the party at 2 a.m., and the mood was chilled with a friend DJing. Out of the blue, a not-so-young guy started to take off his clothes and was dancing completely naked. Then he started to wank. It freaked me out because he was also on a heavy dose of acid and mescaline. The way he was acting was beyond everything else I had seen. Other folks thought it was normal. They said it's just natural. An elderly lady joined him, and that's when I decided to leave. Turns out the folks at the party were some of the last hippies from the 70s. Some of them were doing weird things. Imagine someone totally gone with acid talking at a wall. Basically, the host had spiked some water bottles with acid. I didn't drink from it because I don't touch others' water bottles. My friend, by the way, was only 17. In retrospect, I think those were messed up people. Story 79. It happened when I went to see my GF's family for the first time ever. They live in a rural area in a completely different province, so it was quite the effort to get there, and I'd be there for a while. I already felt completely out of my element. New place, new people, but when I was in the bathroom, something happened and I literally thought I was going to die. I took the biggest crap of my life and clogged their rural, ancient plumbing. The first day meeting the parents, and I filled that thing with more crap than I thought humanly possible. I didn't use the washroom on the airplane over, and was in too much of a rush when leaving my house to do the deed. I guess I was creating this monster the whole time. I found their plunger and began to fight against the beast for upwards of 20 minutes. After my girlfriend realized I was in the washroom for too long, she came to check on me and found me stewing a poop soup with her plunger. After her snickering quietly for a while, she decided to give me a hand, to no avail. Eventually, we had to ask her brother to help us out. Nothing but laughter and disappointment. So they get to their mom, who's kind enough to not laugh at me, and she begins plunging all that nice food she made me earlier. Really great stuff. Potatoes or something. Of course, she can't get it done either. We're all taking turns plunging the hell out of this toilet until they all give up and call for the dad. Great. Well, he walks in, pumps once, and the toilet is unclogged. He walks out like he's king crap, but that's probably me in this situation. We're all amazed, and now everyone knows what the inside of my colon smells like. It was overall a pretty decent visit, though. Story 80. Flew across country to stay with someone I'd known online for a few years. I went to attend an event that was happening in his area, but would stay with him while there. He kept making advances toward me that I rejected. He eventually hid my flight information / ticket, SA'd me, and locked me in a third-story room with bars on the windows. I could hear him pacing around the house and smashing things for a few hours. I thought he was going to kill me. Later, begged for him to talk to me so he'd unlock the door, and I played nice and apologized for being difficult, and said I was just nervous, etc., and I did have feelings for him. He let his guard down and let me out of the room. We went to the beach that day, and I had to figure out how I was going to escape without him chasing me or hurting me. That night, he initiated sex, and I went along with it, knowing what would happen if I said no. He He fell asleep around 3 a.m., and I got all my things and I stole his keys to let myself out. The doors on his house had deadbolts that would only unlock with a key from either side. I just started running until I found a taxi to take me to the airport. It was Memorial Day, and my return flight in a couple days was not able to be moved. So I called my mom and begged her to buy me a ticket home, and she did. Moral of the story, even if you know someone online for years, be careful, because they may turn out to be a psychopath/SAer who wants to imprison you. This is definitely a terrible story. Glad that OP was okay, but this just again speaks to the hazards of online dating, and I guess, having remote connections with people is fine, but then when it comes time to meet them in person, people are just different, when they're behind a keyboard or behind their phone screen. Yeesh, that's scary. Story 81. My best friend and I were 16 and house sitting less than a mile away from our homes. We're from southeastern Minnesota, and it was a particularly stormy June. There was a severe thunderstorm warning. We went outside and watched the clouds swirl and the leaves flip the wrong way as the sky turned green. We went in when it started raining. Soon, the power went out. We moved to the basement, but it was a split-level home, so there were still windows in most rooms. A tornado warning was issued. We peeled out the window and looked at the storm siren, conveniently located right off the street, and it was spinning in silence. No sound. Still only heard the thunder and rain blasting the house in all directions. It was bad. As soon as it passed, we checked in with our families and the power came on soon after. Turned out there was a tornado that didn't quite reach the ground about a mile and a half away, and that the storm sirens weren't functioning in most of town. Definitely prepared me to be intense during thunderstorms in the upcoming years. Story 82. I was around 12 years old, and almost every day after school I would take a bus to my best friend, Abby's house. She lived on a medium-sized, rustic-looking farm. They had horses, pigeons in a huge cage, and rabbits. She lived with her grandfather, grandmother, who was bedridden, and her older brother. They were all characters, as some would say, but mostly always nice to be around. Although I dreaded when her uncle would visit the house. He always gave off an unsettling vibe, one that would make my stomach drop and my heart pound faster. He had anger issues and was quite aggressive a lot of the time. He never took it out on me, and I never expected him to do so. One day, I was visiting Abby, and we decided to play in her new trampoline. We always had the greatest time on it and would jump on it for hours. Across from the trampoline was a huge pigeon cage, and beside that was a wooden horse stable with a window for the horses to look out, although they never kept any horses in there. While we were jumping on the trampoline, her uncle came out of the house and started to yell very aggressively at my best friend. We were both terrified and started to run towards the horse stable as soon as we noticed him running towards us while shouting since there was nowhere else to go. He had an evil look in his eyes, a look that would make you question his sanity. Abby and I ran into the horse stable while crying and slammed the door shut. I remember being so scared because I realized the lock was on the outside of the door where her uncle was headed. He grabbed the door and while giving us an evil grin through the window, he locked us in the stable. He started laughing like a maniac and continued to yell that he would effing kill us. Abby and I were sobbing and scared for our lives. He eventually went away, and after a few minutes, Abby tried to climb over the tall door to unlock it from the outside. After a few tries, we finally got out of the stable and ran into her grandparents' house, straight into her room, and quickly locked the door. I no longer remember what happened after that, but I will never forget the look in his eyes and the evil grin on his face while we were sobbing. It still haunts me to this day. Story 83. I'm 16 and I'm staying at my friend's house for the summer. His dad has a pistol grip 12-gauge shotgun he keeps high up on a rack in the dining room. One day, everyone else is gone and it's just me, him, and his slightly older sister. We're hanging out in the dining room and my friend pulls the shotgun down and starts messing with it. He pumps it, pulls the trigger, and it just clicks. He does this multiple times. No shells ever eject when he pumps it, and I see/hear him pulling the trigger, so the gun's empty. He hands it off to me. I should know better. I was taught not to play with guns, but figured it's clearly empty, so I can mess around a little. Still, I know not to point it at anyone, even if it's unloaded. So I make a joke to his sister, who's sitting at the table watching us. I point it a few feet to the left of her and pull the trigger. It fires suddenly. My ears are ringing, and I'm in shock. We all just stand and sitting there. I look past his sister, and there's a golf ball-sized hole in the bottom of a solid hardwood door. His sister got up, walked outside, got in a small truck, and cried. I felt like crap for scaring the hell out of her. I was mad at myself, but I was also mad at my friend for making it seem like the gun was empty and not telling me otherwise. I still don't understand what exactly he was doing because my shotgun doesn't work like that. He was clicking some lever, but I don't understand why no shells ever ejected. Stupid choices were made by both of us. I'm just glad I was at least smart enough to not point what I thought was an unloaded weapon at someone. That day could have gone very differently. Don't F around with guns, y'all. Story 84. In college, I was hanging out with a friend at his house. He was a guy, all of his roommates were his. My friend, one of his roommates, and I were having a casual conversation when I stood up and all of a sudden the roommate goes, "Wait, what's that?" I turn around and, to my horror, saw the dark, wet blood spot on the seat cushion I was just sitting on. That's right, I had my period on my friend's cushion. That's not even the worst part. The worst part is that he didn't even know what it was. Maybe it's because the green cushion made the blood look darker? I don't know. He just started making a big deal about it, ranting about how another roommate keeps ruining their stuff. Damn it! I told Nick to stop eating that gross stuff. You'd think he'd just clean up after himself. This is why we can't have nice things, etc. During his tirade, I'm standing far away, completely mortified. I was afraid to run because that would mean I would have to turn around and he might see the blood on my pants. As for my friend, I could tell from his reaction that he caught on at this point, and I wished I could melt into the walls. At this point, the roommate, still ranting, picks up the cushion and starts touching it with his bare fingers. What is this, me kind of sauce? He proceeds to sniff it, and I see my friend cringe. My friend tries to intervene with, "Hey, you don't know what it is, just leave it alone." The oblivious roommate stops smelling it, but is still touching it. It's still wet. He turns to me, and I'm frozen in fear and boiling with embarrassment, thinking that he's finally figured it out. "Amring, I'm very sorry that you had to sit on this. Our roommate is a pig. Now I'm gonna wash it off." He goes upstairs to the bathroom, taking the cushion with him and announcing that he was going to try to clean it. After he's out of range, we race it to the door, and I've never seen that roommate ever again. According to my friend, he didn't figure it out when the dirty wash water was pink. The messy roommate denied all accusations, and my friend kept my secret through it all. The oblivious guy found out several days later when he was ranting about the messy roommate when someone else caught in and had to explain it to him. And then everyone had a giant laugh at the big reveal. I'm glad I wasn't there for that. Also, I did a more thorough job of tracking my period from then on. TLDR, didn't expect period, left a blood stain at an all-guys apartment seat cushion. One guy doesn't understand what it was and starts throwing accusations around and touching it while I'm there. Story 85. I'm excited to have a reason to tell this old story. So, my parents went out of town. They're from Jamaica and visited frequently. They had this big, nice house, and we would all go crash over there, drinking and smoking. This shady guy I didn't like brought some weed, like a ton of weed, and they all start rolling up on the table in the kitchen. I don't smoke, but I was hanging out nearby. He told us over and over again that his family was gone, nobody was there. I go to the fridge to get another drink, and I open the door, and it blocks my right side vision. On the right was a hallway where the lights were completely off, and it faded pretty drastically. When I close the door, I see someone standing at the end. I freeze because it's clearly not one of us. It's a very old lady in a white nightgown of sorts. I'm kinda shocked, so I can't think of what to say, and I turn a little to say my friend's name and let him know when he starts moving towards me much faster than she looked capable. I freaked out and jumped back, and before she got to me, my friend gently led her back down the hallway and up the stairs. He told us nobody was home, apparently left out his grandma with dementia. Story 86. I was sleeping over at a friend's house when the doorbell rang in the middle of the night. His mom gets up to answer the door, as confused as anyone. She couldn't see anything out of the peephole and was looking through nearby windows. Not seeing anything, she twists the handle to open the door, and as soon as the latch releases, the door comes flying in and water starts pouring everywhere. Turns out, someone had filled her giant trash can, the one the city picks up on the street in the suburbs, full of water and leaned it up against the front door. Estimate 2 to 3 full baths worth of water. Luckily, his mom was standing off to the side of the door looking out a side window as she opened it. Her wrist was hurt in the process, though. My friend's brother was making his way out to the front door when this happened. He sees all this happen and runs out the front door to see if anyone is out there. He sees two kids jumping a wall across the street and starts to give chase. He's in nothing but his boxers and has to jump 2 walls and catches one of the kids. He was a few houses down from his house and had no way of getting the kid to come back with him. We didn't know which direction he ran. The kid, full-grown 17 to 18-year-old, was refusing and putting up a fight. My friend's brother ended up punching him in the face a few times and letting him go. We did find out who did it a few years later, and it ended up being a close friend of the family. The water that was in the can flooded a recessed living room near the front door, causing a bunch of damage. Story 87. I was nearly SA'd. I was about 8 and I went to my friend's house. We were watching TV and her father brought in their guinea pigs for me to hold. I thought it was lovely as I'd never held one before. One weed on my lap and the father offered to help me clean up. He took me to a room I'd never seen in that house prior and suggested I take my clothes off. I didn't want to, but I was polite when I declined. After trying to convince me to undress, he then opened up a massive cupboard full of chips and lollies and stuff and began again to convince me of how I should undress and how yucky it would be to stay in soiled clothing and that I'd receive lots of treats if I did what he asked. Eventually, my friend knocked on the door and the father gave up and we never talked about it. I never told anyone. About a year later, my friend came to school crying and told me how she had killed her guinea pigs. She wasn't a crazy, animal-abusing, nasty girl, but I knew why she killed them. I comforted her and realized I wasn't the only one taken to that room and that her father was a disgusting monster. I never told anyone any of it, but when you're a kid surrounded by questionable and many times sexual and unsafe feeling adult behaviors, you just accept things. It's horrible. Story 88. I had a coworker invite me over for his dog's birthday one day. He was a little off, in a way that would be impossible to describe, but he was always friendly to me. He had been inviting me over constantly to meet his dogs, and he started to get discouraged that I never came over. Me and my friend decided to go. I cannot make any of this up. We pull up to his house, and immediately you heard the barking. From the long driveway, you could see 2 of the biggest dogs I've ever seen. We stood at the end of the driveway hesitantly until he came out of the screen door and told us to come in. He let the dogs outside to show us around his home. The first room we went to was the New Year's Eve room. It was his living room decorated with streamers, balloons, noisemakers, the whole nine. This was in June. He said he kept it up because it's a waste of time to take it down just to set it up again. Next, we were met in the kitchen by his girlfriend. His girlfriend was at least 80 years old, and he was about 35 to 40. He kept asking us if he thought his girlfriend was sexy. Very uncomfortable. From there, he showed us his bedroom. Inside his room was a bed, a desk, and a toilet. He installed a fully working toilet just feet from his bedside. No sink, just a toilet. Next, he showed us to his backyard. His backyard consisted of an inflatable pool that had been punctured, so as we stood there, a small trickle of water would continuously pour out, causing his backyard to be soaked. He would fill it back up every now and then. He insisted we get in the pool with him and his girlfriend. No, thank you. Finally, we were showed the basement. Oh God, the basement. There were no lights except for one small room. In this room, there was a homemade hot tub. There were exposed wires everywhere for the lights in this room. In addition, was a young Vietnamese boy, maybe 13, just hanging out in this dude's basement hot tub. Me and my friend asked him what he was doing, and he said he liked to come help with his projects in his free time. We left pretty shortly after that. I was never really scared, but it was for sure the weirdest experience I've ever had at someone else's house. Story 89. At my friend's house for the first time. Had a really pleasant dinner with his dad and stepmom. After dinner, we chatted for a couple hours, until the stepmom started referring to dykes. Friend and I initially laughed it off, but she kept using it, and increasingly unpleasantly. I'm openly a lesbian, and started to feel a little uncomfortable. We tried to keep it light and made a joke about how she probably shouldn't use that word. That was when she flipped. She started cursing us out, telling us we were judgmental and that was the reason people were homophobic, that she had so many dyke friends, and how dare we imply she was homophobic. We just kind of sat there and took it. She was on an absolute rampage. She was threatening to kick us out of the house. It was 3 a.m. in December at this point, and no trains from where we were. Friend's dad was recovering from heart surgery and didn't step in at any point. Eventually she relented, and we went to bed. I've been pretty lucky, and that was the first time someone had been that openly homophobic to me. Cried myself to sleep that night. Woo. Story 90. Back in the day when I was doing a bit too much coke, me and a buddy of mine were trying to score a bit to party for the evening. The only blow we could find was at this tweaker's place. It was a shabby trailer home on the outskirts of Boulder, Colorado, and I wasn't exactly thrilled about going there. The guy, dealer, was sketchy to say the least, so it being our only option that evening, we headed out to the tweaker's pad to score some blow. When the door opened, the guy was obviously strung out from a multi-day binge. Adult content was playing in the background, and the place had a funk about it. But hey, he had coke, so in we went. After about a half hour of talking and waiting, the guy finally said he would hook us up. My friend ponied up the cash and the guy went into the back room. So there we were, standing in this nasty-ass pad, waiting on a meth head to give us the blow we bought. Then the guy started ranting about the government getting ready to lock down the country and how the military had RFID troop movement markers on all stop signs and crosswalk signs, referring obviously to the inventory stickers on the back of the signs. He then walks out carrying a very large knife, think Rambo, and walks behind me, still ranting, and stops to rant a bit more to my friend right behind me. I was obviously freaked the F out, but I had to keep my cool and not tip my hand that I thought this guy was nutters and quite possibly dangerous. Here I was, in a ranting tweaker's crappy mobile home, in the middle of nowhere, in a quiet trailer park outside Boulder, and all I want is my blow and to GTF out of there. His rant continued for a few more minutes, and for a minute I was genuinely afraid I may not make it out of there. So after we agree the government is going nuts and is going to get us all, we are finally able to bounce the F out of there, with slightly less than we actually paid for. The bag was a bit light, but were we really going to argue with the methed out nutter? Nope. This was one of the moments, it took several more, that finally convinced me to get off drugs. But holy hell was that an adventure. To be fair, it might not have been outside Boulder. It was over a decade ago, and my memory is a bit fallible from those years. It was definitely in that general area. Boulder, Longmont, Loveland, somewhere around there. Story 91. When I was 9 or 10, I had a friend I met on the bus who lived down the street from me. I went over for a sleepover, and it was just me, her, and her brother there. We were playing a card game where you use the aces as answers to questions. Hearts equals yes, spades equals no, clubs equals ask again, diamonds equals maybe. So you set the aces in front of you, and then pull a card from the deck, and whatever suite it matches is your answer. Kind of like Magic 8 Ball. After a while, we start running out of questions, and this girl says we should use this game to talk to spirits. Do a few hands and freak ourselves out, so we stop, go to bed, and I think nothing of it. We go to school the next morning, and then I get off the bus with her again that afternoon, just to hang out till my parents got out of work. Turns out her dad was a cop and had cameras all over the house. Was very upset I was, quote, teaching their daughter to worship Satan, and apparently her grandma had fallen in Kmart and broke her hip that day, and their crappy car broke down, so her dad was just losing his crap, screaming at me about how I'm a witch and a devil worshiper who put a curse on their family and tried to kill their grandmother. I ran home, and the stupid thing is, she still kept trying to invite me over after that. Story 92. I was with a buddy while drunk, and we met these seemingly nice people while at a bar. They invited us back to their place, so we go to their house. Well, they start smoking weed. I'm extraordinarily drunk, but didn't smoke weed at the time, so I turned them down. So literally 3 of 4 people were smoking, and I was the only one not. There were 2 kids running around that were way too young for the mother to have random people over to smoke. Well, the husband comes back. He had just gone out to grab cigarettes. Comes in and starts raging. He's throwing crap, screaming at the top of his lungs, the works. The effing dickhead corners me, the only one not smoking, and asks me why I would smoke around his kids. I'm trying to honestly tell this dude I was the only one not smoking while he's beating my face in. Doesn't confront his wife's friend, or my friend. I'm a small guy, and this dude was just middle-aged but had a ton of weight on me, and in my state, I didn't stand a chance. My friend bailed and passed out in their backyard.